Now the following here are miscellaneous clips all about Mr. Obama and our fleeting freedoms. So, if you observe, point number one, under Mr. Obama, trillions of dollars have been missing and nothing have been done by him to help recover those monies or to find out where they went. These monies were given to these international bankers to bail them out by Mr. Obama's administration, President Bush also before. And this money is missing. They were supposed to help people. All this $9 trillion are missing. And Mr. Obama has done nothing to make sure anybody is arrested. No executive order has been written to find the culprits and to arrest them. Take a look at this here.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Inspector Coleman, you're the Inspector General for the Federal Reserve, right? Okay.
That's correct.
Have you done any investigations concerning the Federal Reserve's role in deciding not to save Lehman Brothers, which led to shockwaves that went through the entire financial system?
In that particular area, you know, I don't generally comment on specific investigations, but we do not currently have an investigation in that particular area.
All right. What about the $1 trillion plus in expansion of the Federal Reserve's balance sheet since last September? Have you conducted any investigations regarding that?
Right now we have a, we call it a review, and I don't know if the term investigation may have different connotations. So we're actually conducting a fairly high-level review of the various lending facilities collectively, which would include you know, the TALF, a variety of the different programs that are in process. So we're looking at them at a fairly high level to identify risk.
Well, I understand that, but we're talking about events that started unfolding 8 months ago. Have you reached any conclusions about the Fed expanding its balance sheet by over $1 trillion since last September?
We have not yet reached any conclusions.
Do you know who received that money?
For the We're in the process right now of doing our review, and
Right, but you're the Inspector General. My question to you specifically is, do you know who received that $1 trillion plus that the Fed extended and put on its balance sheet since last September? Do you know the identity of the recipients?
I do not know. We have not looked at that specific area at this particular point on those reviews.
What about Bloomberg's report that there are trillions of dollars in off-balance sheets transactions that the Federal Reserve has entered into since last September? Are you familiar with those off-balance sheet transactions?
You know, I think it may be important at this point, too, just to bring up a certain aspect related to our jurisdiction. And just to clarify perhaps some of my earlier comments. We are the Inspector General for the Board of Governors, and we have direct oversight over board programs and operations, and are also able to look at board-delegated functions to the reserve banks, as well as the board's oversight and supervision of the reserve banks. We do not have jurisdiction to directly go out and audit reserve bank activities specifically. Nevertheless, in our lending facilities project, for example, we are looking at the board's oversight over the program, and to the extent that extends out to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York.
Well, I have a copy of the Inspector General Act here in front of me, and it says, among other things, that it's your responsibility to conduct and supervise audits and investigations relating to the programs and operations of your agency.
That's correct.
So I'm asking you if your agency has, in fact, according to Bloomberg, extended $9 trillion in credit, which, by the way, works out to $30,000 for every single man, woman, and child in this country. I'd like to know, if you're not responsible for investigating that, who is?
We have responsibility for the Federal Reserve's programs and operations, audits, to conduct audits and investigations in that area. In terms of who's responsible for investigating, would you mind repeating the question one more time?
What have you done to investigate the off-balance sheet transactions conducted by the Federal Reserve, which, according to Bloomberg, now total $9 trillion in the last 8 months?
I'll have to look specifically at that Bloomberg article. I'm not, I don't know if I have actually seen that particular one.
That's not the point. The question is, have you done any investigation or auditing of off-balance sheet transactions conducted by the Federal Reserve?
At this point, we're conducting our lending facility project at a fairly high level and have not gotten to a specific level of detail to really be in a position to respond to your question.
Have you conducted any investigation or auditing of the losses that the Federal Reserve has experienced on its lending since last September?
We're still in the process of conducting that review. Until we actually, go out and gather the information, I'm not in a position to really respond to the specific question.
So are you telling me that nobody at the Federal Reserve is keeping track on a regular basis of the losses that it incurs on what is now a $2 trillion portfolio?
I don't know if you're telling me that you're mentioning that there's losses. I'm just saying that we're not, until we actually look at the program and have the information, we are not in a position to say whether there are losses or to respond in any other way to that particular.
Mr. Chairman, my time is up, but I have to tell you honestly, I am shocked to find out that nobody at the Federal Reserve, including the Inspector General, is keeping track of this.
This next clip shows us FEMA camps activated under Mr. Obama. And these camps are to hold people during a state of emergency or when they're setting up their New World Order or to detain people. And under Mr. Obama, these camps have been activated, so they are now functioning. They are actually prepared to put millions of people in these camps all over the United States of America. Take a look at this clip.
If you thought the NDAA was bad, National Defense Authorization Act of last week was bad, if you thought that was hardcore, the secret arrest of Americans, the end of posse comitatus, military on the streets, the whole world a battlefield, if you thought all the announcements that they want to take your pension funds and put them into government control was bad, if you thought any of this MF Global stuff was bad, this new piece of intel that came in today that we researched all day and then put an article out just an hour or so ago on or less, if you think that all of that was crazy, this little piece was a crystallizer, was a real indicator of just how serious things are. And what am I talking about? Well, there it is on screen right there. Exclusive government activating FEMA camps across America, across the United States. And of course, that's quite a headline. We have the emails, we have the internal Halliburton KBR documents, government defense and infrastructure, not for public eyes, restricted info, sent to us by people in government. I'll just leave it at that. And it's got the 5 regions for the FEMA camps, and it talks about barricades and barbed wire and armed guards, and it says that they built the camps and that now they need to get ready to staff them, and that they need to be ready within a 72-hour period for the guards and the people in the canteen with the food and the launderers and just the whole 9 yards. There it is. So they've been setting this up for more than 2 decades, and now they started earlier in the year, back in February of this year, advertising for upwards of 100,000 internment specialists here in the United States, and now we're learning where they'll be at. Now this particular manning of the camp is your local sports stadium, your local FEMA center. These are 300-person camps to 1,000-person camps where they then interrogate you and go over things, and then you're sent off to the 1 million-man camps that we're going to be breaking down. But I tell you what, I did a whole report on this. Oh, thank you, Marcos. Appreciate that water. I've done a whole report on this that's coming up. But I suggest that you do what anybody with common sense, and of course our listeners, I think I have a little extra common sense, I would call your friends and family right now. And I would tell them to mosey on over to Infowars.com so they can see this information. And I would tell them to get this information because it's a lengthy article that Kurt Nimmo and I put together this afternoon. It goes over all of it. And it's got links to films and congressional hearings and admissions of all of this. And so I want to challenge everybody to call their friends and their families now and realize that the new economy is to put tens of millions of people, we already have the biggest prison population in the world, in this archipelago, this giant chain of facilities all over the country. Because it's all there. All the government documents, all the government admissions, a civilian inmate labor camp program run by the Army, where they're at, all the details down to how they're going to break the families up and where the children go and the forced inoculations and everything. The executive orders, the legislation, the congressional hearings. But I tell you, Glenn Beck used to giggle and laugh a couple years ago. He really enjoyed that. Where for over a month he built it up that I think FEMA camps are real. We've done an investigation and we're going to expose it on this date. Then the date would come and he's, oh, I'm sorry, we're not ready, but it's bad what we're finding. And then a day later, after saying, oh, we have Popular Mechanics, the yellow journalism specialist of the famous family of yellow journalism.
This next clip shows us Mr. Obama versus free speech. Mr. Obama versus free speech. So take a look at it.
Now, actually, we have things happening here which are, though not that extreme, are quite ominous, I think. And the Obama administration in particular has a pretty poor record on this. So there's one case that was decided by the Supreme Court a couple of months ago that is pretty ominous in its implications. And that case was brought to the court by the Obama administration, who wanted their position accepted, and they were the plaintiffs, and it was argued by Elena Kagan, Obama's most recent appointment to the Supreme Court, Harvard Law School dean. Essentially, it's the first major attack on freedom of speech in the United States since the notorious Smith Acts back around 1940. It was the case, the specific charge was against a group called the Humanitarian Law Project, and they were charged with having given what's called material support to a terrorist group. The material support in this case consisted of their giving advice to a Turkish group that's on the U.S. State Department terrorist list, advice on legal aid. In fact, under the terms of this decision, advice urging them to pursue nonviolent means would be criminalized. Now, that's very far-reaching. It's been criticized by civil libertarians, but not far enough, because we have to ask ourselves, what's the terrorist list? The terrorist list is a government. The government arbitrarily, without review and without justification, determines that such and such a group is a terrorist group. Now, that's quite arbitrary. In fact, it's been done in outlandish ways over the years. Just to take one striking case, back in 1980, Saddam Hussein's Iraq was on the terrorist list. In 1982, the Reagan administration decided that they wanted to support Saddam Hussein in his attack against Iran. So they therefore took Saddam off the terrorist list. After that came Saddam Hussein's worst crimes, the gassing of Kurds at Halabja, the Halabja massacres, all kinds of use of chemical warfare. All of it was okay. The Reagan administration attempted to block every criticism of it, and they were off the terrorist list. Well, what kind of a list is that? If the government can arbitrarily decide that Saddam Hussein, one of the worst gangsters around, is not a terrorist because they want to assist him in his terrorist atrocities, what kind of a list do we have? That's only one case. But the whole terrorist list is totally illegitimate. It's just an arbitrarily determined, decided list established by the State Department with no review and no appeal. You know, they put you on the list, you're on the list. So, and then the idea of barring material support extending to straight speech, like legal advice or advice to assume nonviolent means, that's a very sharp attack on freedom of speech.
We would see here that Mr. Obama's banker boys get bailout while the common man remains in poverty. Take a look at this clip again.
Seasoned sailors tell us that when a ship is sinking, all the rats in the hull make their way to the deck and leap overboard to safety. Market analysts also tell us that when you see corporate executives making for the exit doors, it's time to sell your stock. In Washington, D.C. of late, all the rats in the hall of the White House have made their way to the deck and leaped overboard to safety. But whether or not we can sell our stock in the failed company known as Obama's presidency, only China, which owns our debt and our labor force, knows for sure. Now, what do these rats have in common? That is, Larry Summers, Rahm Emanuel, Peter Orszag, Steven Rattner, former members of Obama's economic team with Rahm Emanuel as chief of staff. What do these all have in common? Not only are they co-religionists of the Judaic persuasion, but they are intimately tied with the oligarchs on Wall Street who have outsourced America's jobs overseas. And with these Obama boys all bailing out at the same time, it appears that they share a secret that the rest of us peons have not been clued into. But it doesn't really take a rocket scientist to know what these economic architects of America's decline know that we the people don't know. With 14.9% Americans without a job and 26% unemployment. Come November, these same Americans and just about everyone else with no longer any bang for their buck will be looking around to see just who is to blame for their economic woes. The American Jewish Committee is not so dumb either. Organizations like the Anti-Defamation League, the American Jewish Committee, and B'nai B'rith are very well aware that their own kind control both the financial and economic spheres of American life. With investment banks like Goldman Sachs funding the outsourcing of American jobs overseas, and with 5 Zionist Jews on the board of governors of the Federal Reserve Bank. High profilers with a distinctive Jewish flavor. Larry Summers, Rahm Emanuel, a dual citizen of U.S. and Israel, Peter Orszag, and Steven Rattner are doubtless being advised to low profile it, leap overboard, flee the White House before Americans start looking for that proverbial scapegoat. As president of the Brother Nathaniel Foundation, we are engaged in educating the American public, showing just where the source is of their economic problems, which the mainstream media will not give them. Sometimes it takes a little bringing into focus for Americans to see what's right before their very eyes. Judaics have bankrupted America with their wars for Israel in Iraq and Afghanistan, and have decimated American jobs by their investment banks, replacing the American labor force with labor forces centered in Shanghai and New Delhi. The United States is the first country in history to destroy both the prospects and the standard of living of its own American labor force, and the ladders of upward mobility that made America of old the land of opportunity is now being dismantled. By who? I'll tell you who. The same Obama boys and their ilk that have fled and are fleeing the failed Obama presidency. That's who.
The following clip shows that Mr. Obama is a traitor.
YouTube, he signed it. The National Defense Authorization Bill, Obama signed it over the weekend under the cover of darkness. just like all of the scum traitors do. Traitor. Obama, traitor. Anybody in Congress that signed the bill, traitor. Our government is traitorous against the American people. And this morning I was checking a couple of videos, and he is a Trojan horse. I heard somebody else say it. I just can't remember who said it, but I'm saying it. I'm repeating it. Obama's a Trojan horse in the White House to intentionally destroy this country with the things that he has said. I didn't say that. He said he was going to fundamentally change America. He said he was going to bankrupt the coal mining industry in this nation. He said those things, among others. We are in a new world order, an intentional destruction of this nation. We are no longer free Americans. We can be taken anywhere, held forever, without charge, without trial. Yeah. All right, that's all I got to say. Stay asleep. Continue going to Walmart. Do your thing. But you and me can be grabbed, taken away forever, held forever in the New World Order.
The following clip tells us that Mr. Obama is worse than the ex-President Bush and then Prime Minister Blair of England. So see it in this clip.
We know, because we've seen what you've had to say on the subject, how you regard Bush and Blair's record in the Middle East. Do you think Obama's no better?
In many ways, it's worse.
Why?
I've been writing about it. I started writing about it before the election.
Why is he worse?
Well, should we go through the details?
Please.
In the case of Afghanistan, he's sharply escalated the war. This is threatening a breakup of Pakistan, which could be a catastrophe for the West. In fact, there's quite an important article that just came out by Anatol Yevin, who knows Pakistan very well, whose his conclusion is that British and American soldiers are dying in Afghanistan to make life more dangerous for Britain and the United States, namely because of the impact on potential breakup of Pakistan, which has both a huge number of nuclear weapons and a radical Islamic development, both of them supported by the West, both, and continue to be. Obama is continuing to carry out actions which are threatening this. Let's go to, I've already talked about his attitude toward Egypt, the usual one, follow the usual game plan, which I mentioned. Let's take Israel-Palestine. I mean, his position is shocking. He's refused to do. I mean, there was just a UN Security Council resolution a few weeks ago, in which calling on an ending of settlement expansion, and declaring the settlements illegal, which is not even controversial. Obama vetoed it. Alone, a General Assembly resolution shortly before was similar. The United States and Israel and a couple of Pacific Islands opposed it. You know, and this is the record all the way through.
You famously said that every American president since the Second World War would fail in the judgment as applied at Nuremberg, and therefore effectively should be hanged. You say the same applies to...
I didn't say not everybody was hanged at Nuremberg. I said if we
not
believed
everyone was hanged.
I said if we believed in the Nuremberg principles,
yes,
every American president would be subject to them. What the decision would be, we'd have to check. Notice that this is the Nuremberg principles, not the trials.
But Obama would fare no better were those principles applied to him.
No, he's carrying out a major war in Afghanistan. He's supporting. He's directly involved in aggressive and criminal actions carried out by Israel, for example. He's only been in office for 2 years, so he hasn't a chance to invade anyone yet. But his record is quite consistent with what's happened before.
This next clip shows us that Mr. Obama is a slave to the Jews. When they're all getting elected or going up for election, they all run to this IPAC, this American Israel Public Action Committee or organization. and they always speak before it's saying that they will protect Israel, and that's no part of the U.S. Constitution. This is to get money and to get votes. Again, here is Mr. Obama as just as one of those same lackeys or slaves of the Jews.
Senator Barack Obama, the Democrats' presumptive presidential nominee, spoke Wednesday at the American Israel Public Affairs Committee Policy Conference, as did his defeated rival, Senator Hillary Clinton, plus Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid, House Minority Leader John Boehner, and House Speaker Nancy Pelosi.
I want to make a point of acknowledging our extraordinary Speaker of the House, Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who spoke just before me. How important her words were, particularly in remembering the 3 soldiers that are still held by Hezbollah.
Every opportunity this Speaker of the House has, I will always impress upon our visitors that we will never rest, that we will be relentless in the fighting for the release of Gilad Shalit, Ehud Galwasser, and Eldad Regev.
I have been proud to be a part of a strong bipartisan consensus that has stood by Israel in the face of all threats. That is a commitment. That is a commitment that both John McCain and I share, because support for Israel in this country goes beyond party.
Senator Obama voiced support for Israel and for Jewish Americans, not only as a presidential candidate, but as an African American.
Our alliance is based on shared interests and shared values. Those who threaten Israel threaten us. Israel has always faced these threats on the front lines, and I will bring to the White House an unshakable commitment to Israel's security. That starts with ensuring Israel's qualitative military advantage. Let there be no doubt, I will always keep the threat of military action on the table to defend our security and our ally Israel. Do not be confused. As president, I will work to help Israel achieve the goal of 2 states, a Jewish state of Israel and a Palestinian state, living side by side in peace and security. And I won't wait until the waning days of my presidency. I will take an active role and make a personal commitment to do all I can to advance the cause of peace from the start of my administration. I'll never forget that I would not be standing here today if it weren't for the commitment that was made not only in the African American community, but also in the Jewish American community, and the great social movements in our country's history. Jewish and African Americans have stood shoulder to shoulder. They took buses down south together. They marched together. They bled together. And Jewish Americans like Andrew Goodman and Michael Schwerner were willing to die alongside a black man, James Chaney, on behalf of freedom and on behalf of equality. Their legacy is our inheritance. We must not allow the relationship between Jews and African Americans to suffer. This is a bond that must be strengthened. Together we can rededicate ourselves to end prejudice and combat hatred in all its forms. Together we can renew our commitment to justice. Together we can join our voices together, and in doing so, even the mightiest of walls fall down. That work must include a shared commitment to Israel.
This following clip shows Mr. Obama signing an executive order on Iran. So it becomes law without Congress. Take a look at it.
The chair lays before the House a message.
To the Congress of the United States, pursuant to the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, 50 U.S.C. 1701, IEEPA, I hereby report that I have issued an executive order, the order that takes additional steps with respect to the national emergency declared in Executive Order 12957 of March 15, 1995, and Executive Order 12957, the President found that the actions and policies of the government of Iran threatened the national security, foreign policy, and economy of the United States. To deal with that threat, the President, in Executive Order 12957, declared a national emergency and imposed prohibitions on certain transactions with respect to the development of Iranian petroleum resources. To further respond to that threat, Executive Order 12959 of May 6, 1995, imposed comprehensive trade and financial sanctions on Iran. Executive Order 13059 of August 19, 1997, consolidated and clarified the previous orders. To take additional steps with respect to the national emergency declared in Executive Order 12957, and to implement Sections 105A of the Comprehensive Iran Sanctions, Accountability and Divestment Act of 2010, Public Law 111-195, 22 U.S.C. 8501, CIS-ADA, I issued Executive Order 13553 on September 28, 2010, to impose sanctions on officials of the government of Iran and other persons acting on behalf of the government of Iran determined to be responsible for or complicit in the certain serious human rights abuses. To take further additional steps with respect to the threat posed by Iran and to provide implementing authority to a number of the sanctions set forth in the Iran Sanctions Act of 1996, Public Law 104-172, 50 U.S.C. 1701 Note, ISA, as amended by CIS-ADA, I issued Executive Order 13574 on May 23, 2011, to authorize the Secretary of the Treasury to implement certain sanctions imposed by the Secretary of the State pursuant to ISA, as amended by CIS-ADA. Finally, to take additional steps with respect to the threat posed by Iran, I issued Executive Order 13590 on November 20, 2011, to authorize the Secretary of the State to impose sanctions on persons providing certain goods, services, technology, information, or support that contribute either to Iran's development of petroleum resources or to Iran's production of petrochemicals, and to authorize the Secretary of the Treasury to implement some of those sanctions. I have determined that additional sanctions are warranted, particularly in light of the deceptive practices of the Central Bank of Iran and other Iranian banks to conceal transactions of sanctioned parties, the deficiencies in Iran's anti-money laundering regime, and the weakness in its implementation, and continuing an unacceptable risk posed to the international financial system by Iran's activities. The prohibitions of the order do not apply to property and interest in property of the government of Iran that were blocked pursuant to Executive Order 12170 of November 14, 1979, and thereafter made subject to the transfer directness set forth in Executive Order 12281 of January 19, 1981, and implementing regulations thereunder. In addition, nothing in the order prohibits transactions for the conduct of the official business of the federal government by employees, grantees, or contractors thereof. I have delegated to the Secretary of the Treasury the authority, in consultation with the Secretary of State, to take such actions, including the promulgation of rules and regulations, and to employ all powers granted to the President by IEEPA as may be necessary to carry out the blocking regulated purposes of the order. All agencies of the United States government are directed to take all appropriate measures within their authority to carry out the provisions of the order. I have also delegated certain functions and authorities conferred by Section 1245 of the NDAA to the Secretary of the Treasury and the Secretary of State in consultation with other appropriate agencies as specified in the order. I am enclosing a copy of Executive Order I have issued. Signed, Barack Obama, the White House, February 5, 2012.
Referred to the Committee on Foreign Affairs and ordered printed. Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the Chair declares the House in recess until approximately 4:30 p.m. today.
Now here is something called the Obama Doctrine, and you will see in this clip, you will see what it is in this clip, and you will see it being refuted. So pay attention.
The latest political buzzword can be found in over a dozen op-eds, touting to the highest heaven what is being called the Obama Doctrine. For instance, in the Rothschild Bankers magazine, The Economist, an op-ed feature titled "The Birth of the Obama Doctrine" appeared this week, praising the president for his new dogma of humanitarian military intervention launched in Libya. As the magazine sees it, the Obama Doctrine will either sweep Gaddafi from power or reduce the Libyan chief to impotence as he hunkers down in some desert bunker.
Of course, there is no question that Libya and the world would be better off with Gaddafi out of power.
Thus, The Economist concludes the Obama Doctrine, with its promising beginnings in Libya, will be remembered as an extraordinary foreign policy success. But let's back up a little bit and apply the scalpel to this newfangled dogma as it's being spewed forth from the Zionist-inspired White House Oval Office. First of all, the Obama Doctrine replaces the war authority of Congress with the UN. As Rand Paul pointed out in his recent address to the Senate, Obama neither consulted Congress nor sought a resolution for an attack on Libya.
And the president now is going to engage us in a third war without any consultation, without any voting in Congress, and without any congressional authority.
Instead, Obama got his authorization for war not from Congress, but from the UN, a clear sign of Obama's disdain for the U.S. Constitution. Secondly, the Obama Doctrine displaces the support of the American people of yet another U.S. war with the backing of the international community, thus subverting and undermining the sovereignty of America. Third, the Obama Doctrine doesn't clearly define the U.S. mission in Libya, but under the pretext of humanitarian military intervention, allows the attack to expand in unseen directions, regardless of the bloodshed and chaos it will cause. And fourth, and most frightening of all, by the Obama Doctrine, appealing to the UN rather than Congress, a precedent is set for a world body influenced by Zionist Jewish money to decide what leaders are to be toppled and what leaders are to be propped up, forcing nations on the march to a one-world Zionist governance. All told, one aspect of the Obama Doctrine is crystal clear. U.S. funding for the genocidal state of Israel remains intact. AIPAC, the powerful Jewish lobby that no politician dares to oppose, recently posted on their website Obama's promise of $3 billion in aid to Israel for fiscal year 2011.
This is a bond that must be strengthened.
The posting begins with a propagandizing headline, U.S. funding to Israel vital for U.S. national security. Oh yeah, sure. Already the vast majority of Republican freshmen in the Senate have signed on to a letter foisted upon them by the Jewish lobby, committing to the $3 billion a year aid package to Israel, which millions of unemployed Americans who have lost their homes could have used instead. Bottom line, either play ball with the Jewish lobby or your political career on Capitol Hill is over. And with Obama seeking re-election in 2012, his Zionist-scripted Obama Doctrine will fetch him the votes, the media hype, and the money the Jewish lobby provides to those who submit, surrender, and succumb to their doctrine to rule not only America, but the entire world as well.
Now this next series of clips will explain Mr. Obama and the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, that dangerous piece of legislation that just became law. These clips are going to explain a little more about it to help you understand.
Now, I know some people want me to bypass Congress and change the laws on my own.
But Senators McCain and Levin have added this legislation, and that would authorize him to use the military to arrest people in the United States who, in the president's opinion, are enemies of the country.
Then also trained as internment resettlement specialists.
I want that person to be terrified
about what's going to happen to them in American custody.
And now NDAA 2012 is law.
Under the provisions, would it be possible that an American citizen then could be declared an enemy combatant and sent to Guantanamo Bay and detained indefinitely?
They said it couldn't happen here.
The administration asked us to remove the language which says that U.S. citizens and lawful residents would not be subject to this section.
There would never be troops on the streets of America. There would always be due process.
And when they say, I want my lawyer, you tell them, shut up.
Your time is expired.
Get a lawyer. You're an enemy combatant.
Senators McCain and Levin added a provision which would require terrorist suspects held in military custody. But could that extend to U.S. citizens eventually? Joining us right now is Fox News senior judicial analyst and host of Freedom Watch on the Fox Business Network, Judge Andrew Napolitano. Good morning to you.
Stevie, good morning.
Okay, so explain what this particular provision would do.
This is a bill to fund the Defense Department. There's a lot of other bells and whistles in it.
Usually that's just pro forma, let's vote.
Right. Here's the amount of money the Defense Department can spend. Here's how we want them to spend it.
Right.
But Senators McCain and Levin have added this legislation which would authorize the president to declare the entire United States of America, all 50 states and all territories, to be a battlefield.
It was the conspiracy theorists that warned that there was a plan to overthrow our republic and use the military against the people, that FEMA camps had been built, that citizens could be secretly arrested and disappeared.
I want that person to be terrified about what's going to happen to them in American custody.
And now NDAA 2012 is law.
That would authorize him to use commander-in-chief authority in the United States to use the military to arrest people in the United States who, in the president's opinion, are enemies of the country. It would then permit him to incarcerate and detain these people indefinitely, to keep them from a lawyer, to keep them from a judge, to keep them from a jury, to lock them up for as long as he wants.
It did happen here.
Please know what will come your way. Death, detention, prosecution.
It's illegitimate. It's a fraud. It's tyranny in your face. The only question is, will the people of the United States let this tyranny now be put into action? Just look at the NDAA and its passage. All the lies. Oh, at first it didn't affect citizens. Now they admit it does. A global declaration of war against all countries. Congress handing that power to the president, making him a dictator.
The Senate blocked a bill that would have created this commission. So I'll issue an executive order that will allow us to go forward, because I refuse to pass this problem on to another generation of Americans. I know some here wish that I could just bypass Congress and change the law myself. I know there's some folks who wish I could just bypass Congress. I can.
Secret arrest of citizens, torture, indefinite detention. Then the senators came out who authored it and said, you bet it affects citizens. We want you to be scared. And they went further and said, don't criticize us. Obama demanded this be in the legislation. The ACLU and others went to Obama and said, did you really do this? And they said, yes.
Now, I know some people want me to bypass Congress and change the laws on my own. Believe me. And believe me, right now dealing with Congress, the idea but believe me, the idea of doing things on my own is very tempting.
That's how bad this deception has gotten. where they want to have their tyrannical cake and eat it too.
Military Occupational Specialty Internment Resettlement Specialist. This MOS plays an integral role in providing a uniform system of handling prisoners and detainees. First and always, these MPs are combat support soldiers trained to fight, then also trained as internment resettlement specialists to control and supervise detainees, to ensure their humane treatment, and to assist them in returning to a productive life. For this job, the Army will train you to use specialized equipment to monitor activity, to conduct searches, and to inspect areas where prisoners work and live. Serving in this MOS can help you transition from the military to the civilian employment sector. In the Military Police Corps, you'll be providing both combat support and law enforcement wherever you go, always upholding our motto, of the troops and for the troops. Military Occupational Specialty Internment Resettlement Specialist.
But why are they hiding the fact that it affects citizens? Why are they hiding the fact that Obama signed it? Because they want to do their crimes secretly, because they know what they're doing is wrong.
The problem with this is Senator Lindsey Graham, who supports it, has argued that this would authorize the President of the United States to arrest Americans by simply saying they gave up their citizenship rights.
Here's what Lindsey Graham says. Basically, say in law, for the first time, the homeland is part of the battlefield and people can go to jail indefinitely, American citizen or not. So you're just afraid down the road that one day the President of the United States, whomever he or she might be, might say, okay, let's arrest that guy.
Suppose the president decided that one of his political opponents was an enemy of the state. He could make that person disappear.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in reluctant opposition to the National Defense Authorization Act of 2012, which we'll be voting on today. The bill does include provisions that are vital to our national defense, but it also includes provisions that present a false choice between our safety and our values. Section 1021 would authorize the indefinite military detention of all terrorism suspects, allowing the United States to detain an individual, some of whom may be innocent, without charge or trial during this endless war on terrorism, undermines our most defining principles as a nation of individual freedom and justice.
But Senators McCain and Levin have added this legislation which would authorize the president to declare the entire United States of America, all 50 states and all territories, to be a battlefield, even though there's no battle, thanks be to God, going on here.
War on terror is different.
And that would authorize him to use commander-in-chief authority in the United States, to use the military to arrest people in the United States who, in the president's opinion, are enemies of the country. It would then permit him to incarcerate and detain these people indefinitely, to keep them from a lawyer, to keep them from a judge, to keep them from a jury, to lock them up for as long as he wants.
Okay, so now...
I, Barack Hussein Obama, do solemnly swear to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
The original Constitution, I think it is an imperfect document, and I think it is a document that reflects some deep flaws in American culture, the colonial culture nascent at that time. I think we can say that the Constitution reflected an enormous blind spot in this culture, and that the framers had that same blind spot. It also reflected the fundamental flaw of this country that continues to this day.
Yesterday, President executive order claiming the right to incarcerate persons in the Guantanamo Bay military prison for the duration of their natural lives, even after acquittal. You heard that correctly, after acquittal. Following upon President Bush, President Obama has claimed the power to punish people even after a jury has found them not guilty. No Western government has ever claimed the power to do this. Not the King of England, not Hitler, not Stalin, not even the Russian and Chinese communists. Now, I realize that most Americans have little sympathy for those incarcerated at Gitmo, and most no doubt assume that they are there because they probably did something wrong. They must be guilty of something. But that view turns the Constitution on its head. When he was a senator and running for president, Barack Obama stated that the beauty of the Constitution is that it guarantees fairness to everyone. He was right. But as president, he wants to lock people up forever, even after a jury finds them not guilty. Why should you care about this? Because if the government gets away with it by demonizing these prisoners and making it the popular thing to happen, it could happen to you.
Young Turks has been one of the few media outlets that's covering the National Defense Authorization Act, and what a horrible piece of legislation it is. I thought it was one of the worst we've ever passed because it allows for the indefinite detention of U.S. citizens without a trial. Since we've been covering it, we've been getting some criticism, not from Republicans who love it and pushed for it in the first place, but from Democrats who support President Obama. And they say, how dare you criticize President Obama for this? And you have it all wrong. So two of their main arguments against us have been, one, you haven't read the bill. In fact, the bill does not allow you to do that against United States citizens. And then number two, if it's anybody's fault, it's Congress's fault. Well, let's address both of those. First of all, let's go to the language of the bill, right? Because we've been over this a couple of times. Apparently, people aren't getting it. So they will send us this portion of Section 1021 of the NDAA. And it says this, quote, nothing in this section shall be construed to affect existing law or authorities relating to the detention of United States citizens, lawful resident aliens of the United States, or any other persons who are captured or arrested in the United States. And they go, aha, you see that? It says it doesn't apply to U.S. citizens. No, you missed two incredibly important sections of that. The first and the last. In the beginning, put it up again, it says, nothing in this section shall be construed, meaning this does not apply, this exemption does not apply to the rest of the bill. It only applies to Section 1021. And then second of all, it does not apply to United States citizens caught abroad. Okay? It only applies to them here because look at the end of it. It says, who are captured or arrested in the United States. So, now this is about the broad provision of covered persons, right? Which is very, very broad. This is what these are the people that the military can detain indefinitely without trial, right? So if you're detained outside of the United States, the U.S. citizen exemption does not apply. Now, of course, that makes sense because we've already executed U.S. citizens without a trial abroad. Awlaki was in Yemen. He's a United States citizen. We dropped a drone on him, killed him. No trial, no nothing, okay? And according to this, he's like, well, look, he was abroad, so it doesn't apply. We can do anything we like. So understand what the real language says. Now, Section 1022 is not as broad as covered persons, but it is still broad enough that it applies to anybody that is part of al-Qaeda or associated forces that the president believes is engaged in an attack or planning any attack or thinking about an attack. No, let's be fair. In any way planning an attack with associated forces of al-Qaeda, which is incredibly broad anyway, right? So in there, though, there's a provision that, reads like this. It says, United States citizens, the requirement to detain a person in military custody under this section does not extend to citizens of the United States. And people say, aha! Well, it doesn't extend to the citizens of the United States, so what are you guys complaining about? No. Again, you missed the important part, and that highlight that we did over there shows you what the important part is. Glenn Greenwald has done the same thing. It is the requirement to detain a person in military custody under this section doesn't apply to U.S. citizens. In other words, previously the bill had said, if you're a U.S. citizen, the military, and you're suspected of any of this stuff, the military must detain you without a trial. Now it says it's up to the president. It's not a requirement anymore. The president can choose to detain you indefinitely, or he can choose to give you a trial, which means, yes, United States citizens can be held indefinitely without a trial. Now, another thing that confirms this interpretation is the president himself, who in a signing statement, as we showed you yesterday on the program, said, I will choose in my administration not to indefinitely detain U.S. citizens, meaning another administration can choose to do so, meaning that the bill says, yes, the president has the authority and the option of detaining U.S. citizens without a trial indefinitely. This is definitive. And it's not just my interpretation. It's not just Glenn Greenwald's interpretation. As we told you yesterday, the team of lawyers at the ACLU, whose job it is to protect our civil liberties, says that is definitely the correct interpretation, and it is hideous. Now today, more people piling on. Amnesty International, here are their quotes. The bill places enormous power in the hands of future presidents, and the only answer the president has is to say, trust me. And they say that is not good enough when he says in a signing statement, trust me, I will not use the option of detaining people indefinitely without any rights whatsoever. That is not good enough. That is not how a country of laws operates. They go on to make even tougher statements. Here's Amnesty International again. Once any government has the authority to hold people indefinitely, the risk is that it can be almost impossible to rein such power in. President Obama has failed to take one action, a veto, that would have blocked the dangerous provisions in the NDAA. In so doing, he has allowed human rights to be further undermined and given al-Qaeda a propaganda victory. So did we all get it wrong? Did ACLU, Amnesty International, all the people who read the bill and, as we just explained to you, showed you the exact content of the bill? Did we all got it wrong? No, you're deluding yourself because you want to support the president by any means necessary. And if all those people didn't convince you, let's go to Jonathan Turley, well-known professor in constitutional law, trusted progressive. He was livid about this. Here's some of his quotes. With Americans distracted with drinking and celebrating, Obama signed one of the greatest rollbacks of civil liberties in the history of our country. And cities and citizens partied on blissfully into the new year. This is exactly what we were saying yesterday, saying that he signed it on New Year's Eve so no one would notice. Mission accomplished, because almost the rest of the media did not mention it at all. So they just went on their merry ways. And as Jonathan Turley says, the professor of constitutional law, one of the worst rollbacks in our history. He continues, White House conducted a misinformation campaign to secure this power while portraying the president as some type of reluctant absolute ruler, or as Obama maintains, a reluctant president with dictatorial powers. Again, pointing to the signing statement saying, well, I don't want to use these powers. Oh, golly gee willikers, did I just sign it into law that I have basically dictatorial powers? Now that seems like harsh language. This is not a harsh guy. This is a guy who's very studied, knows his Constitution, and like all the other lawyers commenting on this bill, we can read, he can read, he looks at it and he goes, yes, Fifth Amendment is destroyed. We no longer have due process rights. They can hold us indefinitely without a trial. This is crazy. It is so un-American. And by the way, it's not just the president, it's almost all the Republicans who agreed to this. It is bipartisan agreement in the United States of America, not in America, I should be clear on that, but in the United States Congress, that yes, we will sell out your rights and we will sell out the Constitution. One more quote from Jonathan Turley. For civil libertarians, the NDAA is our Mayan moment. 2012 is when the nation embraced authoritarian powers with little more than a pause between rounds of drinks. Now, second part of the criticism leveled at detractors of this bill and of President Obama for signing it is, no, you don't understand, Congress was in favor of it as well. To which I say, of course, but we criticize Congress all the time, and we criticize them for passing the bill in the first place. Before, when President Obama was threatening a veto, we were saying that Obama was on the right side. Later, that turned out to be not very accurate because Senator Carl Levin explained, no, President Obama pushed to include U.S. citizens as part of his power to detain indefinitely. So we were giving him too much credit earlier, and we were saying Congress was at fault. But look, you want to call it what it is, no question about it. The House voted overwhelmingly in favor of this, 322 to 96. The Senate voted 86 to 13. And 6 Democrats voted no, 1 independent, of course, Bernie Sanders, and 6 Republicans voted against it. So give them equal credit, those guys, for being on the right side of this. Everybody else went along with this travesty, including so-called liberal or progressive senators. Let me give you a list of all the people who sold us out on this. Barbara Boxer, she's supposed to be a big-time liberal. Dianne Feinstein is not a big-time liberal, but she's the person who introduced the amendments that said this should not apply to United States citizens. They voted that down, which again makes it clear. They said, no, Congress and the president said, we want to include U.S. citizens. We are voting against that amendment, and the president signed it, right? But did that stop Feinstein from voting for it? No, didn't matter. Oh, you're including citizens? Who cares? I'll vote yes anyway. Look at the rest of the list. Mark Udall, great amendment on campaign finance reform, a disaster here. John Kerry, of course, the 2004 candidate for the Democrats. My senators from my home state, Frank Lautenberg and Robert Menendez, always talk about how progressive they are. Sure you are. Look at this. Here comes the worst of the list. Sherrod Brown, Democrat of Ohio. Sheldon Whitehouse, Democrat of Rhode Island. And Patrick Leahy, Democrat of Vermont. Why are they the worst on the list? Because these are the guys who claim to be the biggest progressives. Sherrod Brown, you're going to do it again? Remember, before his last election, Sherrod Brown sold out and signed away our rights in the Military Commissions Act. Then he came on the Young Turks and said, oh, that was such a mistake, I won't do it again. Right before his next election, the National Defense Authorization Act comes, and he goes, yeah, you need me to sell out again? Oh, my God, I don't want the Republicans to criticize me. Yes, I vote to take away your rights. So are you saying I didn't criticize Congress enough? Was that clear enough? Whether it's the Republicans or the Democrats, they all did something horrible here in taking away an enormous part of our Constitution, and they're all guilty. Was that clear enough? The Defense Authorization Act has basically made it through Congress. They've got agreement on it, and what it does is it allows for indefinite detentions of enemy combatants. The military gets to decide who's an enemy combatant, and it operates on U.S. soil and can apply to American citizens. So it's horrible. It destroys the 5th and the 14th Amendments, and Posse Comitatus Act becomes irrelevant. That means the military can act within the United States. Plus, it really goes to the foundation of Western law in questioning habeas corpus. And Congress, as we just told you, has agreed, but President Obama was threatening a veto, and we were at least happy that President Obama was on that side of the issue. But some people have been dissenting voices, including John Wood of Change.org, saying, no, wait a minute, the president is objecting to Section 1032 of this bill, not 1031, that is the portion about it applying to United States citizens on U.S. soil, etc. So you're giving him credit for the wrong things. In fact, Glenn Greenwald at Salon has also written about that and saying the president actually wants more power, not less power, and his veto threat is not something that is done to protect our civil liberties. Well, those were all interesting theories until Senator Carl Levin went on the floor of Congress and told us, at least based on what he's saying here, if he's telling the truth, that in fact President Obama wanted it to be the exact opposite. Not that he thought it had too much power in the bill, but that the executive should have more power. Let's let Carl Levin explain.
The administration asked us to remove the language which says that U.S. citizens and lawful residents would not be subject to this section. Is the senator familiar with the fact that it was the administration that asked us to remove the very language which we had in the bill which passed the committee, and that we removed it at the request of the administration that would have said that this determination would not apply to U.S. citizens and lawful residents?
Now, Senator Levin is the guy who crafted that portion of the bill, and if he's telling the truth here, he's saying President Obama came in and said, no, 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 I want to make this bill even, well, he wouldn't put it this way, I would, even worse, even more of an abuse of civil liberties, by making sure that I can also indefinitely detain United States citizens. That's the worst part of the bill. If Senator Levin is right about what happened there, then President Obama is, again, not on the right side of this issue, he's on the wrong side of the issue. And that he wanted to do the veto threat so that he could have more power, not less power, and abuse our Constitution and our civil liberties more, not less. Well, I mean, that's so disappointing that I can't take it anymore. I mean, I So what does that mean that I can't take it? I mean, you've seen me criticize President Obama over and over again. It's not that I'm shy about that. It's that if this is true, I almost literally don't see the point of supporting President Obama anymore. I'm not mincing words. I don't see the point. And somebody will have to try to figure out, you know, I guess go ahead and try to convince me, write comments, send us emails through theyoungturks.com, participate through current.com/theyoungturks. You tell me why I'm supposed to vote for this guy. But if he really, this so-called constitutional law professor, has such little respect for our Constitution that he's willing to shred it like that, well, in some ways, he's worse than a Republican. Why? Now, first of all, I think Newt Gingrich is a danger to the Republic, right? But is Newt Gingrich going to propose something worse than indefinitely detaining American citizens without a trial? I'm not sure I can think of anything worse. Is he going to propose or do something worse than kill United States citizens abroad without a trial, which is what President Obama has done with drone strikes? I'm not sure I can imagine something worse. So, and then the really harmful part of President Obama is he totally gets, unfortunately, a large portion of the left to stand down. If President Bush put this bill forward, the left would have been in a rage. Outside of our show, Countdown, people like Glenn Greenwald, and a couple of other shows, I see nothing. Mainstream media, of course, as always, is oblivious. They're like, what's Jerry Sandusky doing? I don't even know how many times they've even talked about this or even noted that there is some outrage behind it. And then where are the activists? Where's the left? Where are the Democrats? You know, Al Franken voted for this? What the hell was the point of sending him to the Senate? Are you kidding me? They gut our Constitution like this? And President Obama goes, no, it's okay. I put the Democratic seal of approval on it, so everybody shut up, stand down, and let's do exactly what the right wing wants to do and destroy our civil liberties. Well, then he's of no use. That he doesn't help the country, he hurts the country. Look, man, this is an interactive show. If I got it wrong, you tell me, you show me. And please don't come to me with weak sauce stuff about how, oh, no, but you don't understand, Congress is so important. He couldn't get beyond Congress. Well, here's Senator Levin. Again, if he's telling the truth, saying, no, he went to Congress and said, you're not right-wing enough. I need you to be far more right-wing. And second of all, when Bush was in charge, Congress, he had majorities, didn't have majorities, he didn't give a damn, he got everything he wanted. Back then, the president was incredibly strong. Now you're going to get me to believe the president is incredibly weak and has to do everything the Republicans tell him to do? No, he wants to do it. That's what makes me particularly sick. Let's hope that Senator Levin is a liar, but I don't think so. It doesn't look like it at the moment being.
President Barack Obama has signed a controversial defense bill that basically allows the indefinite detention of terror suspects. The U.S. president said he had serious reservations on some provisions regarding the treatment of detainees. But as Marina Portnoy reports, during his time in office, Obama's shown he's not always good to his word.
Long before he became U.S. president or a Nobel Peace Prize winner, Barack Obama was a constitutional law professor.
We have never been more energized and united in our desire to take this country in a new direction.
A civil liberties champion turned charismatic candidate who vowed to reverse the abuses and policies of his predecessor, George W. Bush. 3 years later, many civil rights advocates who once cheered, "Yes, we can," are finding themselves saying, "No, you can't."
Not only has the Obama administration blocked torture accountability and refused to investigate and prosecute, he's basically maintained indefinite detention. He's revived military commissions. And as we've seen as well, he has expanded targeted killings. So they've increased under the Obama administration manyfold, and he's even authorized the killing of a U.S. citizen. So, you know, I think, yeah, we're in a, you know, there's a bad state of civil liberties under the Obama administration.
World-renowned author and scholar Noam Chomsky believes the Obama administration has changed gears and accelerated illegal practice into overdrive.
There's a shift between Bush's policies and Obama's on this. Bush's policy was to kidnap people, whatever you thought about them, take them to Guantanamo or Bagram or some other torture chamber and try to extract some information out of them. Obama's policy is just to kill them. They're killing them all over the world, and the bin Laden assassination was a case in point.
Another is the targeting drone killing of Anwar al-Awlaki, an American-born cleric. U.S. drone strikes during Obama's first 2 years in office exceeded the total carried out during Bush's tenure. President Obama described al-Awlaki as the leader of external operations for al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. Human rights groups, which voiced international opposition against Bush counterterrorism policies, quickly condemned the al-Awlaki killing. Journalist Jeremy Scahill says Obama's policies have drifted far from his political roots.
A President McCain doing the exact same thing that a President Obama is doing would have been denounced by a lot of liberals. And so we're at one of those dangerous moments in U.S. history, and we saw it a bit with Clinton in the 90s, where a Democrat who campaigned on a pledge to change the country and the world has actually pushed a right-wing agenda further forward than a Republican could have if they remained in power or they took power.
Or expanded power. As Obama gears up for his re-election campaign, civil liberty groups that believed his words the first time around are now left to judge the commander-in-chief on his actions. America's democracy is represented by a president who studied and taught the rule of law and is now armed with the duty to carry it out. But critics say as long as Obama plays by his own rules, the Constitution and his promise of change both remain compromised. Marina Portnaya, RT, New York.
President Obama, on New Year's Eve, signed the National Defense Authorization Act. Gee, I wonder why he did it then. Obviously taking a lot of heat for it from progressives who he needs to help him win the election. He's just figured that out. And so he does it when no one is paying attention. And he does a signing statement along with it on H.R. 1540. So first of all, a lot of people have been saying, hey, wait a minute now. It's not fair to say that this bill allows for the indefinite detention of U.S. citizens, because at one portion of the bill, it says this says shall not change the laws regarding detention of United States citizens. Except there's another portion of the bill that says that it does change the law. Now, that is purposely vague because they do change the law, but they didn't want to take heat for it, so they put another provision in there going, oh, well, hopefully you're confused enough by this. So what does it do? It leaves it to the executive branch as to whether they would like to take those extra powers or not. Now, what usually happens with the executive branch? They take those powers. But President Obama wants to make clear that under his administration, that the executive branch will not detain U.S. citizens, since he's given the option in this bill, basically with the vague language, because one portion definitely states that he can detain U.S. citizens, okay? So he attaches a signing statement that objects to sections 1021, 1022, 1023, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 1231, 1240, 41, 42, 45, 44. So, in other words, he objects to an enormous portion of this bill, but nonetheless, he will sign it into law. Now, if you remember, we objected greatly to signing statements under George W. Bush. That was, of course, in a different era where now, apparently, if you're a Democrat, you're supposed to say signing statements are fantastic. Now, why do we object to it? Let me jump to graphic number 6 here. Now, this is in the signing statement from President Obama, and it gives you an excellent sense of why we objected to signing statements, whether they're under Republican or Democratic administrations. Quote, should any application of these provisions conflict with my constitutional authorities, I will treat the provisions as non-binding. Excuse me, but what the hell is that? Did you guys, did any of us take civics courses? Did President Obama take a civics course? He taught constitutional law. Where in the Constitution does it say, hey, by the way, a president can sign a bill, but then say that I can treat any part of it he doesn't like as non-binding? That's the most unconstitutional thing I've ever heard. That's totally not within our government to say, hey, you know what? The president is basically can do any damn thing he likes. He can take a law and say, I like Part A, I like Part B, but I don't like 18 other parts. I'm glad you passed it in its entirety, and I signed it in its entirety, but that is not how I will execute the law. It's ridiculous. It was ridiculous when Bush did it. That's why we were so mad about it. It's still ridiculous under Obama. Now, are there portions of the signing statement that I like? Yes, but the problem is, one, you can't have a signing statement be constitutional if you ask me. I think if you ask any decent law professor. And then number two, other administrations and other courts will not take this signing statement as law because it isn't law. It is the president's opinion about a law that he's actually putting into effect. Now, let's go to the parts that I kind of like, but show you the problems with those as well. So he says in his signing statement, I have signed this bill despite having serious reservations with certain provisions that regulate the detention, interrogation, and prosecution of suspected terrorists. Now, I like that he has reservations with it. A lot of people will read that sentence and go, that's it. See, I knew Obama was on the right side. But the fact that he has reservations is irrelevant. The fact that he signed it is the only relevant thing. You can have all the reservations that you like. If you sign the damn thing into law, it's law. Now, second part. He says, I want to clarify that my administration will not authorize the indefinite military detention without trial of American citizens. Indeed, I believe that doing so would break with our most important traditions and values as a nation. Now, again, I like those statements. I think a lot of people look at those statements and go, I knew Obama was on the right side. Says he won't do the indefinite detentions. In fact, it's against our core principles. But the key words in those sentences, my administration. I want to clarify that my administration will not authorize the indefinite military detention, meaning the next administration is perfectly free to do that because it is the law. You signed it into law. You don't get to say, hey, you know what, if it's President Romney or President Gingrich, then he has to have the same interpretation of this law that I do. And in fact, he doesn't even make that claim. He just says, my administration won't do it, but it'll be law, so you can be indefinitely detained later. Good luck to you. I don't know if it's part of his re-election campaign to then turn around and say, see, you don't want to elect a Republican because they might indefinitely detain you, whereas I signed it into the law, but will, out of the goodness of my heart, choose not to do it until I change my mind. He continues in the signing statement, my administration will interpret Section 1021 of the bill in a manner that ensures that any detention it authorizes complies with the Constitution, the laws of the war, and all other applicable law. Again, key sentence there. My administration will interpret Section 1021. That is the most offensive section in the bill. But it's still in the bill, and they could choose to have a different interpretation on a different day. We are supposed to be a country of laws, not of men. We're not supposed to depend on the benevolence of our leadership, okay? Laws are laws, and he just signed it into law saying, yes, my administration, future administrations can indefinitely detain you, which, by the way, goes to that point. The people who said, hey, you know what? Oh, no, this bill says that the previous laws are in effect, and you can't indefinitely detain citizens. Really? Then why does the president keep talking about it in his signing statement? Obviously, he thinks that the bill does allow for that. He's saying the bill allows for it, but my administration will choose not to do it. If that's good enough for you, look, if you want to vote for Obama for other reasons, that's perfectly understandable. No question about that, right? I get that. I might even agree with you, right? But if you want to say that he didn't do, you know, this atrocious act of signing one of the worst pieces of legislation into effect, you're wrong. You're wrong. The bill is allowing indefinite detention. The president understands and acknowledges that and says he might not do it. Or he says, you know what, let's be merciful to him. And let's say that he is 100% truth teller, although he has not been in the past in terms of campaign promises. And this time he means it, and he won't do it. So what? The next president can, Republican or Democrat. You should have never signed it into law. Now, a lot of people have been making one last charge. Oh, it's Cenk Uygur and Glenn Greenwald and people like him that actually read bills, and I can't believe they read it. How outrageous, when we should just trust the goodwill of President Obama. But it must be just them, right? They're probably seeing it wrong. That's interesting because the American Civil Liberties Union has a whole team of lawyers. They all looked at it, and here's their conclusion. Anthony Romero, executive director of the ACLU, says, President Obama's actions today is a blight on his legacy because he will forever be known as the president who signed indefinite detention without charge or trial into law. So what's the next thing? Did the ACLU get it all wrong? All of their lawyers also don't know what they're doing, even though this is their job. American Civil Liberties. Okay, they say apparently, no, they don't. None of us get it. None of the people who read the bill understand it. None of the lawyers understand it. Only President Obama understands it. But even he says it's possible. All right, one last one from the ACLU. We are incredibly disappointed that President Obama signed this new law, even though his administration had already claimed overly broad detention authority in court. Any hope that the Obama administration would roll back the constitutional excesses of George Bush in the war on terror was extinguished today. Is that clear enough for you? He is not going to do what he said he was going to do when it comes to civil liberties. He is not going to roll back the excesses of the Bush administration, and he is going to continue them, and unfortunately with this law, codify them and strengthen them.
All right, folks, there's a lot going on right now. Decisions being made that are unprecedented and will have an overreaching impact on what it means to live in the United States of America. Just down the street from our studios, in the U.S. Capitol, your elected officials, both the Senate and the House of Representatives, have just overwhelmingly passed the National Defense Authorization Act. Squeezed into this military funding bill are two provisions that give the military not just lots and lots of money, but lots and lots of power as well, through two very controversial provisions. One expands the use of military force in Afghanistan to include indefinite detention of anyone suspected of being a member of al-Qaeda or, quote, associated forces. So, essentially, anyone. But here's the big one, folks. It gives the military the power to indefinitely detain American citizens, even those captured here in the United States, suspected, just suspected, not convicted, of some sort of involvement or affiliation with terrorism. In a recent article with the question, can broadened counterterrorism rules open the door to indefinitely detaining peaceful protesters, J.A. Meyerson writes that the problem is the Fourth Amendment is the precondition for the First Amendment. If a person can be detained without a charge leveled, then a person can be detained without a crime even alleged to have been committed, including for confrontational, peaceable assembly. J.A. Meyerson is a contributor to the online publication Truth Out and is in our New York studios to talk more about this. Hey there, J.A. It seems to me the Fourth Amendment in this case has really just been thrown out the window. Talk to me about your take on all of this.
Yeah, well, it's incredibly troubling. I mean, it's not good enough to me to have a president who probably wouldn't detain peaceful protesters because he's focused on capturing terrorists. I want the Bill of Rights, which ensures that no president ever can do that.
Let's talk about the bill itself, the National Defense Authorization Act. This is passed every year. This provides funding to the military. This is something that a lot of people think is good, think is important. This year, very little coverage was done of these two provisions. I know a couple people tried to stop or sort of overturn them. I know Dianne Feinstein wrote a provision that sort of makes part of it she wrote an amendment that makes part of it null and void. And then Mark Udall, the Udall Amendment, went on the floor, and this was overturned. Why is this not as big of a deal? I mean, am I just overreacting? Are you just overreacting?
No, it's a huge deal. The reason the media don't want to cover it is because there's broad bipartisan consent to this proposal. I mean, it really gives the lie to this whole myth about partisan bickering and you know, congressional you know, gridlock and all this kind of stuff. 86 senators voted for the thing. So when there are issues about, you know, solving human crises, the sovereign debt crisis in Europe or the healthcare crisis in the United States, then there's all sorts of gridlock and the factionalism and all that kind of stuff. But when it comes to furnishing an executive branch with huge powers, which, let's say, President Bush and President Obama both already claim, but this gives Congress's august imprimatur to them. When it's to do with that, well, then all the sort of partisan bickering stops, and you get overwhelming bipartisan support for the measure. And as long as there's overwhelming bipartisan support, then there's no political horse race to cover, and everybody turns a blind eye to it. It's really, really shameful.
I think it's a really interesting point. Let's talk about President Obama. Up until a couple days ago, President Obama had vowed to veto this bill. He vowed to veto it for reasons that are a little different from what you or I might say. In some ways, it didn't give the president enough power. He thought the bill undermined his power because it gave too much to the military. The president has changed his mind and will most likely sign it any moment now. So what do you think happened here?
Well, it's the number of bills that he's threatened to veto and has caved on is sort of piling up. But I think it's a mistake to think of this as caving, because his objection to it wasn't on civil libertarian grounds, like anybody who has any interest in upholding the Bill of Rights. His interest, as you say, was in furnishing the executive branch with even more power, with taking power from civilian prosecutors and the FBI and all sorts of other law enforcement agencies, and just reserving it for himself and for the military. So in essence, the objection was on the opposite grounds from the actual humane ones that one could level at the thing. And once Congress really is the one who caved. Once Congress caved on that point, the president was happy to sign it into effect. You know, as I say, he's already been claiming these powers. This is a really important thing for people to understand. President Obama has been claiming these powers. As we've seen, he's claimed the power to assassinate American civilians abroad with no due process at all. This just codifies it into law by Congress in a way that's really disgusting. And actually, there are provisions in it that I don't fully understand because I'm not a legal scholar, that I gather, based on the reporting of Jonathan Turley, Glenn Greenwald, and others, makes it really difficult to legally overturn these provisions as well. So it's really a shoring up of the kind of civil libertarian or civil liberties abuses that President Bush started with after 9/11, and it makes it really difficult to see a way out of this horrible quandary that America finds herself in.
J.A., I too am not a legal scholar, but when you say that from what you've read, from what you understand, that this will be hard to legally overturn, that's just surprising to me, because it seems that the most basic constitutional provisions in there, as we were talking about before, the Fourth Amendment, that those are being ignored. How is it that this is so difficult to legally overturn?
Yeah, well, the thing is that the sort of legal superstructure of the United States has been very subservient to politicians and especially to intelligence agencies and the military in terms of the fight against terrorism, which is how this whole thing is framed. It's useful to remember that this is all, according to the politicians, about terrorism. But the fact of the matter is that it leaves everybody vulnerable to the thing. It might be that no president will ever use these powers to target anybody other than people that they legitimately suspect to be involved in terrorism. But the reason that we have these provisions is to take away that sort of arbitrary handing out of justice and to make this a nation of laws. The fact is that Occupy LSX, the London Stock Exchange, the Metropolitan Police put out a memo equating the occupiers there with Al-Qaeda and with FARC and other terrorist factions. There's been a lot of insinuation there were counter-terror cops that I've seen with my own two eyes down at Zuccotti Park surveilling and harassing the protesters down there. There's a deep insinuation that dissent is somehow connected to or accessory to terrorism. And that's a really horrifying prospect, because once we have provisions in place that give unfettered authority to detain indefinitely without trial anyone even just suspected of being a terrorist, well, that opens up the field to peaceable assembly as well. The more that this terrorist as protester or protester as terrorist myth is transmitted through the channels of the media, it's really, really scary, and people have every right to be very concerned about this.
I think you're right, and I think under the guise of being at war, whether the war in Afghanistan or the war, quote, on terrorism, I think that's when things get really murky, and that's what these new provisions, once they're signed into law, really add, is sort of a stamp of approval on allowing the murkiness. I want to talk about one other thing while I have you here, and this is SOPA, the Stop Online Piracy Act. It's just sort of an extension of another way in which Congress is interested in expanding rights to the powerful. I know that it looks like debate will pick up after the holiday break. Congress decided to give this one a rest for now. But what this does is this gives U.S. law enforcement and copyright holders to fight online trafficking and copyrighted intellectual property. It's just really, really interesting to me when you look at what Congress is trying to do. Maybe they're using the time, being so close to the holidays, to do this, but really trying to just expand the power of what lawmakers have the authority to do. What do you see happening here with SOPA?
I mean, I see civil libertarians losing another big fight. It's because that's all that's happened since 9/11. The Patriot Act and then the extension of it and all of the FISA, all of these laws have just been put in place to, prop up and expand vastly the powers of law enforcement that may be up to no good, we have no checks on them, and to diminish the power of individuals. This is exactly, I mean, there's a lot of hemming and hawing about how Occupy Wall Street is sort of unfocused, or people will only talk about the financial crisis or whatever, but actually what this is about is reclaiming, not reclaiming, because it's not obvious that we ever had it, but claiming power for ordinary citizens, and everything that you know, abridges that power, from environmental abuses to war abuses to legal abuses like these, will you know, fire up the protests even more, and I think that we'll see a big protest backlash against this kind of thing.
All right, J.A. Meyerson, a contributor to Truth Out. Interesting discussion there. Thanks so much.
Here are clips showing Mr. Obama preconditioning the mind of the public to accept him bypassing Congress to pass laws, which destroys the very policy foundation of republicanism and democracy, and hence of the U.S. Constitution. So in these series of clips, you will see him testing the waters, testing the people, that he may practice a dictatorship of bypassing Congress and making his own laws. Take a look at these surprising, shocking clips.
The Senate blocked a bill that would have created this commission. So I'll issue an executive order that will allow us to go forward, because I refuse to pass this problem on to another generation of Americans. I know some here wish that I could just bypass Congress and change the law myself. I know there's some folks who wish I could just bypass Congress. I can. Now, I know some people want me to bypass Congress and change the laws on my own. Believe me. And believe me, right now, dealing with Congress, the idea but believe me, the idea of doing things on my own is very tempting.
Let's go ahead and go to this clip of Obama openly here trying to sell you dictatorship. I can fix everything. Just let me do whatever I want. We've heard that before in history. Here it is.
The Senate blocked a bill that would have created this commission. So I'll issue an executive order that will allow us to go forward, because I refuse to pass this problem on to another generation of Americans. I know some here wish that I could just bypass Congress and change the law myself. I know there's some folks who wish I could just bypass Congress.
Super creepy.
I can. Now, I know some people want me to bypass Congress and change the laws on my own. Believe me. And
cheering for tyranny. Yes, yes, we're idiots. We really think you're good. You remember the very same bankers Bush was.
And believe me, right now, dealing with Congress, the idea...
Yes, we can get rid of Congress. Those folks would take your guns in a minute.
Believe me, the idea of doing things on my own is very tempting.
And then we've got him being sworn in, saying he protect and defend the Constitution. Yeah, one of the people he's putting forward with these recess appointments without ever trying to actually get them through Congress was named Chief Operating Officer of Citigroup's Alternative Investments Unit. He is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. And it just goes over all of that. Yeah, replacing another mob boss daily. I mean, literal mafia. So this is the type of garbage that we deal with. Oh, man, it makes my head spin. Yeah, William Daley is resigning as White House Chief of Staff, and the Budget Chief, Jack Lew, will take his place. And no need to get him appointed. Who needs Congress? You can launch a war without him, whatever you want. Here's another clip from Real Clear Politics of Obama being creepy. Here it is.
These are ideas that have support from Democrats. They have support from Republicans around the country, independents around the country. I want to work with Congress to get them done. But when Congress refuses to act, and as a result hurts our economy and puts our people at risk, then I have an obligation as president to do what I can without them.
Hit pause for a minute. See, this is more recent. It was just a few weeks ago or like a week ago. This is what's happening. See, first, the last 3 years is it'd be great to not have Congress, but unfortunately, I got to follow the law. And then a few months later, maybe it would be good if they weren't there. Maybe I will do what I want. And now, years later, yep, I'm doing what I can. Launching war, shutting down power plants. And they're just like, yay, destroy the country faster. This new Lew guy's involved in all these energy companies and payoffs. And, I mean, it's just mind-blowing. Let's go back to the rest of the clip.
I've got an obligation to act on behalf of the American people.
The foreign bankers?
I'm not going to stand by while a minority in the Senate puts party ideology ahead of the people that we were elected to serve.
Oh, you're not going to stand by.
Not at this make-or-break moment for middle-class Americans. We're not going to let that happen.
No, he's going to help you. Oh, he cares so much about you. That's enough. Thank you. He goes on and on. Yeah, this is the guy when Congress wouldn't give approval for the Libya situation. He just said, well, I get my authority from the UN. I mean, there's no reason to even have a Congress. And I'm not saying they're going to save us either. They're a bunch of crooks that need to be impeached. And again, it's out of this extreme criminality, this extreme arrogance towards the rule of law, Constitution, checks and balances, our protections, common sense, what makes America America, that they sit there. It's like a bunch of body snatchers, you know, pointing at Ron Paul like he's the guy that's the weirdo. When really, I mean, if you study the Constitution, Bill of Rights, Ron Paul is just following the Constitution. But it's so alien today because we've gone so far down this rat hole.
This is the way a republic ends. Now, I get it. I mean, the president really, really, really wants to work with Congress. He really does. But they don't really agree with him, and it is a crisis. So he's got to go to the authoritative level, you know, and tell everybody what to do. Yeah, there's a word for that. I'm trying to remember what it is. I remember. Dictate. That's what somebody who's going to dictate. Wait a minute, that would make somebody a... No. Gee, just think how much he can get done. Hail Caesar. I'm not sure which is more disturbing. Obama testing the waters here, or the fact that the people cheered. Which do you think? Cheer? It is a pattern. People cheering on a dictator wannabe. Watch this pattern.
The Senate blocked a bill that would have created this commission. So I'll issue an executive order that will allow us to go forward, because I refuse to pass this problem on to another generation of Americans. I know some here wish that I could just bypass Congress and change the law myself. I know there's some folks who wish I could just bypass Congress. I can't. Now, I know some people want me to bypass Congress and change the laws on my own. Believe me. And believe me, right now dealing with Congress, the idea but believe me, the idea of doing things on my own is very tempting.
Anybody ever see the episode where I talked about that former Czech Republic editorial, where they said the problem is not Obama, the problem is the American people? Because if they fall for it this time, they'll fall for somebody worse next time. It's the American people. How many times did he say, you know, there are people that want me to bypass? He's setting the road. He's plowing the field. That's all he's doing. And the people are cheering him to violate the Constitution. Excuse me, but I believe the president took an oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States of America from all enemies, foreign and domestic. Two thoughts on this one. The enemies are inside the gates. The enemies are the defenders. And does anybody remember how hard it was for this man who just never blows a line to take the oath? Do you remember that? When he took the oath, he screwed it up so badly, he had to take it without us watching him take it, which is strange, the next day. There's one more thing. He doesn't like the Constitution. He loathes the Constitution. He calls it a charter of negative liberties. He believes it should be a charter of positive liberties. That's like, you know what? I really love the color orange. If it were just green, then it would be great. But that's nothing against orange. It just should be green. He's fundamentally transforming, not protecting our Constitution and our country. We are living, did anybody read that? I don't expect anybody did. Anybody read Philip Drew, Administrator? Not a soul. Good for you. You guys were smart. I recommended that like 2 years ago, and nobody read that. It's one of the worst books I've ever read. I mean, just poor literature. It's bad. It was Woodrow Wilson's favorite book. And when I started reading about Woodrow Wilson, I wanted to get into his mind and see what he was thinking. So I figured, you know, I wanted to find out what he was reading all the time. He read this book 3 times. It is the blueprint for what we're going through right now. Philip Drew, Administrator, a guy who just wants to serve. That's it. He just wants to serve. He just wants to help. But he can't be president. He shouldn't be president. No, he'll just be an administrator. And he'll go outside of the Constitution. It's exactly what we're living now. And Barack Obama has surrounded the Constitution with boards and commissions and agencies, and he'll just administrate. They have the power of the economy. They can control it. Business. They can control everything, and they don't have to answer to Congress. He is putting a pillow over the face of our system. The founders created this system with the intent of slowing madmen down. That's why it's so arduous. That's the trouble with our system. That's the beauty of our system. They created it to slow people like this down. Give you enough time to catch your breath and say, whoa, 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 wait a minute, wait, stop. He is replacing this with a system that answers only to him or people like him. Am I calling the president a fascist? Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to Afterburner. I'm Bill Whittle. President Obama announced recently that since the Congress will not rubber stamp his job bill, he's going to use executive order to get around that pesky Constitution that he famously said in a radio interview was fundamentally flawed because it limits the power of people like him to do what they think is right. Now, just about everyone professes to love the U.S. Constitution, but conservatives and progressives see it in fundamentally different ways. It seems to me that progressives look at it as kind of like that famous painting of Washington crossing the Delaware. It's part of our Revolutionary War history, suitable for framing, let's say, and useful for quoting and defending when it suits them, and being derided as outdated and the racist product of dead white males when it doesn't. Conservatives look at the Constitution as the law. In the conservative view, progressives try to get around the law through two main doors in the language of the Constitution, the General Welfare Clause and the Commerce Clause. The General Welfare Clause makes an appearance in the preamble to the Constitution, and it also appears in the enumerated powers, good old Article 1, Section 8, which reads that the Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises, to pay the debts, and to provide for the common defense and the general welfare of the United States. Now, the progressives use this as they use everything else. It's a blank check to do whatever they want. Medicare, general welfare. $500 million for a bankrupt solar power company, let's say, that's general welfare. Student loans, general welfare. Big screen plasma TVs for one-legged Sri Lankan ophthalmologist coming to America, general welfare. You know, I've yet to hear progressives mention anything that the General Welfare Clause does not allow, which means that if this clause means what they think it means, government power is unlimited, and every single other word in the entire document, every single word, thought, and phrase that doesn't start with general and end in welfare is utterly and completely meaningless. It's like the Constitution says casually enough, "Hi, I'm your Constitution, come on in and have a seat." And then some legislator says, see, it says have a seat, which authorizes Congress to buy 200 million chairs of various sizes and colors. Also ottomans, couches, hammocks, stools, benches, pews, and ledges. And since it's absurd to have all of these things out in the snow, the Take a Seat clause also obviously authorizes us to build huts, tents, lean-tos, houses, cabins, hotels, mansions, and skyscrapers to put them in. And also it clearly authorizes us to spend trillions on the roads, railways, canals, seaports, navigational aids, electrical grid, sewer system, and the police and fire forces necessary so that you can have a seat. See, it's all right there in the Have a Seat clause. When the Constitution says the general welfare, what it really means is the general welfare. Only that which benefits us all equally. National defense is mentioned because it benefits all of us generally, not some of us specifically. Tax money for interstate highways, that's the general welfare. Taking money from some people and not others, and using that money to benefit some people and not others, that's not the general welfare. That's the kind of vote-buying power grab the Constitution was set up to prevent. Now, take the Commerce Clause. Obamacare says that the federal government has the power at gunpoint, if necessary, to make you buy something you may not want, may not need, and may not be able to afford. Where on earth do these charlatans think they get that kind of power over our lives? Well, through the Commerce Clause, obviously, and that works perfectly well for them until, you actually read the Commerce Clause, which says that Congress shall have the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states and with the Indian tribes. So, are you a foreign nation? What about a state? Are you a state? Maybe you're an Indian tribe, perhaps. Because if you're not one of those three things, then Congress has no power over your commerce whatsoever. None. So, how did they get that power? Well, let's say that the Constitution makes a simple, obvious, declarative sentence like water flows downhill. 100 years go by, and the Supreme Court looks at it and says, well, yes, obviously water does flow downhill, but due to eddies and the quantum motion of subatomic particles, it's probably better to say that water flows downhill except in certain very limited circumstances. 50 years go by, and they review it again and say water mostly flows downhill. 20 years later, the new ruling is water flows both uphill and downhill. Then 10 years later, they say the Uphill Water Act of 1965 is constitutional, since the Constitution's been clearly interpreted to say that water flows uphill. And when you confront them with the fact that a sentence is interpreted to mean the exact opposite of what it actually says, they cite judicial precedent. My friends, the Constitution is an instruction manual, that's all it is. It tells us how to build the federal government. Its entire purpose is to decide what power goes where, and it only deals with three players, the three parties that will share that power. And those parties are the federal government, referred to in the Constitution as the United States, and then the states themselves, and finally, the people. The Constitution says things like members chosen every second year by the people of the several states and the electors in that state, or we the people, or the right of the people to keep and bear arms. Again and again and again, these three same players, the federal government, the states, and the people.
Tonight, a dictatorship A power grab? Former Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich says President Obama is making the biggest power grab in American history and moving America towards a dictatorship. And he's here. Join us live as former Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich. Good evening, Mr. Speaker. And a power grab? Is President Obama doing a massive power grab?
Well, sure. They're doing a power grab in virtually every way. My specific reference was to dictatorial powers that I thought that Secretary of the Treasury Geithner was asking for, where he would decide what companies to take over. He would decide under what circumstances. And let me tell you, the American system was not built for one bureaucrat to decide whether or not they could take your property. But take a look, Greta, a couple other things. When the House last week passed a bill that said they could go back and take 90% of the money from the people at AIG, everybody was happy with that for a second. But wait a second. What if, in fact, then that means Congress can take 90% of your money? And if they can take one group's money, they can take another group's money. And they can do it after the fact. And by the way, those bonuses had been approved by Congress in the stimulus package they voted for. So the hypocrisy and the, I think, danger is very real. And then look at what they're trying to do on the budget, where they're trying to ram through a resolution to break the rules of the Senate, to be able to get through both an energy tax increase and a massive change in our health system on 51 votes, which is clearly a power grab of unprecedented proportions. I think dictatorial is a strong word, but it may frighteningly be the right word.
This is Ron Paul with your weekly update for November 7th. These are frustrating times for the president. Having been swept into office with a seemingly strong mandate, he enjoyed a Congress controlled by members of his own party for the first 2 years of his term. However, midterm elections brought gridlock and a close division of power between the two parties. With a crucial re-election campaign coming up, there is desperation in the president's desire to do something in spite of his severely weakened mandate. Getting something done is proving to be a monumental task. This may be news to the supposed constitutional scholar who is now our president, but if the political process seems inconvenient to the implementation of his agenda, that is not a flaw in the system. It was designed that way. The drafters of the Constitution intended the default action of government to be inaction. Hopefully, this means actions taken by the government are necessary and proper. If federal laws or executive actions can't be agreed upon constitutionally, which is to say legally, such laws or actions should be rejected. The vision of the founders was to set up a government that would remain small and unobtrusive via a system of checks and balances. That it has taken our government so long to get this big speaks well of the original design. The founders also knew the overwhelming nature of governments was to amass power and grow. The Constitution was to serve as the brakes on the freight train of government. But the Obama administration, like so many administrations in the 20th century, chooses to ignore the Constitution entirely. The increasingly broad use and scope of the executive orders is a prime example. Executive orders are meant to be a way for the president to direct executive agencies on the implementation of congressionally approved legislation. It has become increasingly common for them to be misused in ways that are contradictory to the congressional intent or to bypass Congress altogether in enacting political agendas. The current administration has unabashedly stated that Congress's unwillingness to pass the President's Jobs Bill means that the President will act unilaterally to enact provisions of its piecemeal through executive order. Obama explicitly threatens to bypass Congress, thus aggregating the power to make and enforce laws in the executive. This clearly erodes the principles of separation of powers and checks and balances. It brings the modern presidency dangerously close to an elective dictatorship. Of course, the most dangerous and costly overstepping of executive authority is going to war without a congressional declaration. Congress has been sadly complicit in this usurpation of ceding much of its war-making authority to the executive, because it wants to avoid taking responsibility for major war decisions. But that is part of our job in Congress. If the president cannot present to Congress and the people a convincingly strong case for going to war, then perhaps we should keep the nation at peace rather than risk our men and women's lives for ill-defined reasons. The administration certainly was not the first to behave in ways that have defied the Constitution to overstep its bounds. Sadly, previous administrations have set precedents that the current administration is only building upon. It is time for Congress to reassert itself and its constitutional role so that future administrations cannot continue on this dangerous path. Thanks for.
My friends, we have an emergency situation in our republic. Our system of government, of checks and balances, is dying with a whimper, not a bang. It's dying to thunderous applause from people that want to, quote, get their Social Security checks. We've been made dependent, and we have 50 million Americans now in high-tech bread lines every day surviving off of digital food stamps on their government-issued ID cards administered by J.P. Morgan and Goldman Sachs. My friends, this stuff happens, and they report on it in the Associated Press, Huffington Post, like they're talking about what the temperature was today. In an innocuous headline, Mitch McConnell debt ceiling plan, Senate GOP leader offers alternative to Obama's grand bargain. And they just calmly say here, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, Republican of Kentucky, floated a novel way. It's novel. Actually, it's been done in Nazi Germany, Soviet Russia, and almost every other culture that didn't have freedom. A novel way out of the default Tuesday, suggesting that Congress give up its power to raise the debt ceiling and instead effectively transfer that authority to the president. And some Republicans are going, oh, what a genius idea. Once Obama has the dictator powers, he'll be the one to blame. You know, that's how they spin it. They're doing this, even though it's political suicide for the Republicans, because they're owned by the big banks that have us in receivership. It's the same thing you've seen in Greece, same thing in Ireland, same thing moving into Europe. They're now going to their third bailout of Greece. There's never enough. The people don't owe this money. It's derivative fraud created by the central banks and the big six private banks that own the shares in it, that they've gotten our governments that they financed, the presidential runs and prime minister runs of these people all over the world, into power. And so they're now transferring us over to them. It's incredible. It'd be like if I had a debt of $1 million and somehow I got the city mayor to pass a law that you had to pay my private debt, and then when you paid me for my debt, I got interest from you for you paying me for my debt. But side issue. The point is, whether it's war in Libya or whether it's carbon taxes or internet kill switches, or now he's saying he's going to sign executive orders to restrict the Second Amendment. And it was in the Houston Chronicle today. The ATF's just ordering gun shops outside of law now how many guns they can sell, after the government shipped the guns into Mexico to then blame the Second Amendment. I mean, these people are such incredible criminals.
Now, as shocking and outrageous as this may sound, Mr. Obama, the President of the United States, has now become a murderer in the office of President by legal policy. And we want you to look at these clips showing this fact. Not myself has said it, but these people who know, and you would see it in these clips, by murdering American citizens on foreign soil, and then murdering their son. None of them were charged. And then murdering his cousin. None of them were charged. Observe what these clips reveal to us. The shocking state of affairs that has happened in the United States of America.
Tonight, I can report to the American people and to the world that the United States has conducted an operation that killed Osama bin Laden. Shortly after taking office, I directed Leon Panetta, the director of the CIA, to make the killing or capture of bin Laden the top priority. And finally, last week, I determined that we had enough intelligence to take action
and authorized an operation to get Osama bin Laden and bring him to justice. Today, at my direction, the United States launched a targeted operation against that compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan. A small team of Americans carried out the operation with extraordinary courage and capability. No Americans were harmed. They took care to avoid civilian casualties. After a firefight, they killed Osama bin Laden.
Writing in Guernica magazine last week, turning to the issue of assassination attempts overall in this case, in the case of Osama bin Laden, Noam Chomsky wrote, "We might ask ourselves how we would be reacting if Iraqi commandos landed at George W. Bush's compound, assassinated him, and dumped his body in the Atlantic." Can you respond to the U.S. killing of Osama bin Laden?
Well, I think that, the way to stop killing is not by killing. The way to stop terror is not by terror. What should have been done was bin Laden should have been captured and he should have been tried in a court of law. I think that would have done a lot more for the, it would have created a historical record. It would have provided an opportunity for the victims' families, and more information could have come out. We don't know what the orders were, and of course, the information changes that comes out. It's no longer said that he was armed or that he was protecting himself with a wife. So we can't know what happened, or we could know what happened if there was actually an investigation. And
what we do know is the Obama administration said, in fact, he did not have a weapon. He did not attack them.
Exactly. So, they've claimed that he resisted, but they've provided no explanation. There is supposed to be an investigation by the Special Rapporteur on extrajudicial killing. The U.S. should cooperate with that investigation so that the facts can come out.
What about the response that the U.S. is at war with Osama bin Laden?
Even if you assume that we are at war with al-Qaeda, there are still limits on killing. It could still be a war crime. If he had surrendered, if he was under their control. So an investigation needs to be done.
And on orders of the President, a small U.S. team assaulted a secure compound in an affluent suburb of Islamabad to capture or kill Osama bin Laden. The raid was conducted with U.S. military personnel assaulting on 2 helicopters. The team methodically cleared the compound, moving from room to room, in an operation lasting nearly 40 minutes. They were engaged in a firefight throughout the operation, and Osama bin Laden was killed by the assaulting force. In addition to the bin Laden family, 2 other families resided in the compound. One family on the first floor of the bin Laden building, and one family in a second building. One team began the operation on the first floor of the bin Laden house and worked their way to the 3rd floor. A second team cleared the separate building. On the first floor of bin Laden's building, 2 al-Qaeda couriers were killed, along with a woman who was killed in crossfire. Bin Laden and his family were found on the 2nd and 3rd floor of the building. There was concern that bin Laden would oppose the capture operation, and indeed he did resist. In the room with bin Laden, bin Laden's wife, rushed the U.S. assaulter and was shot in the leg but not killed. Bin Laden was then shot and killed. He was not armed.
Did he have any weapon?
He was not armed, is what I understand to be true.
Awkward questions for the White House over the death of Osama bin Laden. Spokesman Jay Carney insisting U.S. Special Forces had been prepared to take the al-Qaeda leader alive, but said he'd been resisting when he was shot dead at a secret compound inside Pakistan. Also disclosing that a woman killed in the raid had not been acting as a human shield as previously claimed, but was simply caught in crossfire. Mr. Carney acknowledging there have been inaccuracies in the original accounts of the raid by US Navy SEALs, saying they released a great deal of information in great haste. CIA Director Leon Panetta confirmed.
The authority here was to kill bin Laden, and obviously under their rules of engagement, if he had in fact thrown up his hands, surrendered, and didn't appear to represent any kind of threat, then they were to capture him. but they had full authority to kill him.
Osama bin Laden and targeting of Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi. The latest U.S. assassination attempt came in Yemen Thursday with a drone strike aimed at killing a U.S. citizen suspected of orchestrating terrorist attacks in the United States, including the 2009 Christmas Day underwear bomber plot. Anwar al-Awlaki, the radical cleric who was born in New Mexico, is said to be the first U.S. citizen added to a CIA list of targets for capture or killing. U.S. and Yemeni officials say they collaborated on the strike. They say the missiles killed 2 suspected al-Qaeda members, but missed their intended target. Last December, Attorney General Eric Holder said the United States wants to neutralize al-Awlaki. During an interview on ABC, Holder was asked how much of a threat al-Awlaki posed.
He would be on the same list with bin Laden. He's up there. I don't know whether he's 1, 2, 3, 4. I don't know, but he's certainly on the list of the people who worry me the most.
Does the U.S. have a preference in terms of al-Awlaki? Dead, captured, or prosecuted?
Well, we certainly want to neutralize him, and we will do whatever we can in order to do that.
That was Attorney General Eric Holder. Well, last year, al-Awlaki's father, Nasser al-Awlaki, asked the ACLU and the Center for Constitutional Rights to help him prevent the Obama administration from killing his son without due process of law. We're joined right now by Maria LaHood, a senior staff attorney at the Center for Constitutional Rights, one of the attorneys who worked on al-Awlaki's case. Welcome to Democracy Now!
Thanks, Amy.
So this attempted assassination of al-Awlaki on Thursday, the CCR's position?
Well, we're, of course, absolutely opposed. It's illegal to kill a U.S. citizen in Yemen outside of armed conflict without any due process unless he poses a specific imminent threat to death or physical injury.
Now, the Obama administration would say he does, or they can't even know exactly what the threat is.
He has received no due process whatsoever. Anything he's done is a matter for a court to decide. He should be charged, he should be arrested, and he should be tried.
Has he been charged?
He has not been charged by the United States, to our knowledge, no. Well, CCR and the ACLU brought a case on behalf of Dr. al-Awlaki, Anwar's father, to try to make sure that what the U.S. did conformed with the law. We didn't argue that there are no circumstances under which he could be killed. We said that international law and the Constitution apply to him and due process apply to him. The court, unfortunately, found that his father did not have standing to seek relief on his behalf, and also found that essentially the questions raised were political in nature, that the U.S. government could label a U.S. citizen a terrorist, and if he were in hiding overseas, they could decide to kill him, and that decision was not reviewable by a court of law.
What happened to the case?
The case was dismissed on those grounds, and it ended.
Moving back to al-Awlaki, he was a U.S. citizen.
He is a U.S. citizen.
He is a U.S. citizen. What's the distinction between assassinating a U.S. citizen and a non-citizen?
Frankly, the international law that applies is the same. The Constitution clearly applies to al-Awlaki because he is a U.S. citizen, so he is guaranteed due process. If the U.S. government can kill a U.S. citizen in Yemen, that not only expands the global war, but it also means that a U.S. citizen could be killed anywhere by our government.
Last September, Democracy Now! Spoke with journalist Glenn Greenwald about Anwar al-Awlaki's case.
There's a list that President Obama maintains with at least 4 Americans on it, one of whom is Anwar al-Awlaki, the American-born cleric in Yemen, of individuals who President Obama, with no criminal charges, no trial, no due process, has ordered assassinated to be killed anywhere they're found, far away from a battlefield, no matter what they're doing at the time, on the grounds, the accusation, unproven accusation, that they're involved in terrorism. Well, that's the sentence. The president has imposed the death penalty on these individuals.
That was Glenn Greenwald talking to Democracy Now! Last September. Your comments?
Yeah, I agree. There's the U.S. Cannot kill a U.S. citizen abroad outside of armed conflict without due process unless they're an imminent threat.
Beyond the issue of whether the government is telling us the truth or pulling a fast one to save Obama's lousy presidency is the issue of the lawful power of the president to order someone killed, no matter how monstrous, how dangerous, or how unpopular. Here is the law. It comes from the Constitution, from the treaties to which the United States is a party, from federal statutes written by the Congress, and from interpretations of the Constitution, treaties, and statutes by federal courts. Killing by the government is a crime, except in self-defense, in war on a battlefield, or after a verdict by a jury for the death penalty. Self-defense means that the person or group or country is just about to attack the U.S. War means that Congress has declared war on the person, group, or country. And a jury verdict means that there was a trial. None of those conditions existed with bin Laden. Surely he was wanted for one of the most horrific crimes in history, and surely he should have been brought to justice. But justice must be according to law, not according to the president, or even the happy throngs in the streets. The emotional and the patriotic sides of me rejoice that this monster is dead, and my fellow Americans feel a sense of closure. I wept right here in New York with the victims of the families on 9/11, and I understand fully their rejoicing today. But the moral and legal sides of me are compelled to warn that this business of the president deciding to kill people is very dangerous and very unlawful. Put aside that governmental assassination is a violation of the Constitution. Put aside that this killing was not in self-defense and was without a declaration of war. Put aside the law that the president may never order the killing of civilians, period. And put aside that governmental killing violates at least 4 treaties and 3 federal statutes. This particular popular killing can and likely will be used as precedent by this president and his successors to kill on a whim. Where will it stop? Who will President Obama kill next? Can the president now send the SEALs to kill Colonel Gaddafi, President Assad, Prime Minister Putin, Fidel Castro, Hugo Chavez, or Kim Jong-il? Can he kill whomever is an obstacle to his purposes? Can he kill Bradley Manning or Julian Assange or Khalid Sheikh Mohammed? Could he kill Glenn Beck or Rush Limbaugh or me? Can the president kill anyone who was once a friend but became our enemy? Suppose France or Great Britain turn on us tomorrow and their leaders get in our way. Well, the answers to these questions are obvious, and that's why we have laws to govern killing by the government. What the president has already killed, unfortunately, is the rule of law. The rule of law is the last refuge of civilized people. It protects us from arbitrary government decisions to take lives, liberty, or property. The president took an oath to uphold the rule of law, and he has violated that oath. Without the rule of law, the president becomes a king, and that is more fearful and potentially fatal to our freedoms than bin Laden ever was.
President Gerald Ford and President Reagan make it clear that assassination is illegal. In 1976, the United States President Gerald Ford issued Executive Order 11,905, Section 5G, states no employee of the United States government shall engage in, or conspire to engage in, political assassination. President Reagan made the ban clearer in Executive Order 12,333. Section 2.11 of that order states no person employed by, or acting on behalf of the United States government shall engage in, or conspire to engage in, assassination. Section 2.12 further says direct participation. No agency of the intelligence community shall participate in, or request any person to undertake activities forbidden by this order.
And now a few items from our Freedom Files. Tonight we're learning of a secret government panel that decides who goes on the government's kill list. A list that includes Americans. Your federal government makes such decisions in secret with an unknown, unelected group of bureaucrats. There is no oversight. There is no public record. There are no rules about the secret panel's activity. And, of course, no laws establishing such a list or such a panel. The secret panel of current and former government officials informs the president who he should kill. And this very panel is responsible for ending the life of an American citizen, Anwar al-Awlaki, a man who had alleged terrorist ties but was never charged with a crime, never tried in a court of law, as his constitutional rights to due process require. Oh, the hypocrisy of President Barack Obama is just stunning. When then Senator Obama was campaigning to become president, he denounced the way in which then President George W. Bush used his executive powers. President Obama, the hypocrite, now has blood on his hands, and now has many people wondering, what other secrets has he hidden in the West Wing? And who might he kill next?
Story came out a little while ago that, quite honestly, I can't believe I missed. Somebody sent it to me, and I'll explain in a minute. I wouldn't have believed it if it hadn't been reported by this one individual. It's about the presidential assassination program, where American citizens are targeted for killings far away from any battlefield, based exclusively on unchecked accusations by the executive branch that they're involved in terrorism. That's interesting. How did we miss that? I don't know what I was on that day. There are allegedly dozens of Americans on this hit list who pose a threat to the United States. Gee, I wonder if I'm on it. The National Security Advisor, John Brennan, said this.
There are, though, in my mind, dozens of U.S. persons who are in different parts of the world that are very concerning to us.
Okay, so we just shoot them. We just shoot them wherever they are. Don't worry about the Miranda rights. Don't worry that they're American citizens. If they're on the battlefield, I say, fine, I get it. But off the battlefield, gee, I'm a little fuzzy on the whole American citizenship thing. Let's refresh our memories on what this administration said it believed. And I have to tell you something. I'm looking for people who actually believed this president. January 15th, 2009, there is no terrorism. It's man-caused disasters. Really? March 13th, 2009, the administration said there's no such thing as an enemy combatant. Why? Because enemy combatants, well, we'd be able to put them in jail now, wouldn't we? March 13th, the war on terror doesn't exist. It's the Overseas Contingency Operation. Yeah. Then, May 26th, Brennan proclaims, jihadists are not the enemy.
Our enemy is not terrorism, because terrorism is but a tactic. Our enemy is not terror, because terror is a state of mind. And as Americans, we refuse to live in fear.
Okay.
Nor do we describe our enemy as jihadists or Islamists, because jihad is a holy struggle, a legitimate tenet of Islam, meaning to purify oneself or one's community.
Okay.
And there is nothing holy or legitimate or Islamic about murdering innocent men, women, and children.
I got it. This is from a president who talked about Arab American families being rounded up off the streets of New York.
If there's an Arab American family being rounded up without benefit of an attorney or due process, that threatens my civil liberties.
That hurts his civil liberties. No rounding up of Arab American families without due process, because it hurts his civil liberties as well as theirs and yours and mine. Yes, sir, Mr. President, I agree with you. I've never seen that happen, but I agree with you. Now, he campaigned on closing down Gitmo because of all of the horrors and atrocities. He wanted to show the world American justice. Let's show the world our justice system. Let them see it on the other side of the planet, by the way. Has anybody seen the story covered by Fox of the Gitmo inmates? They're now watching Twilight, the new vampire movie, on brand new flat panel TVs. Right there by the beach. Wow, sounds horrible, doesn't it? But he said Gitmo had to be closed because it didn't line up with American values and ideals. I got to tell you something. Sitting around all day watching TV on the government dime does seem to be a new American ideal, but I digress. President Obama said if he was elected, he would end the warrantless wiretaps of George W. Bush. He believed it was an affront to human rights if phone calls of terrorists were even monitored or listened to. But I shouldn't have said terrorists or terrorism. That's hateful to call it that. But now, it's totally cool to shoot Americans suspected of terrorism, something that doesn't exist. I'm a little confused because none of this seems to add up. The hypocrisy, kind of like they're against the death penalty, but they don't want to send anyone to prison without trial, so we'll just give them the death penalty and not send them to prison, but we still don't have the trial. Can you help me out with this one? Because I can't possibly figure this one out. Is it possible that they are trying to do to the court system what they've already done to Congress? Make it irrelevant. America, where are your friends and neighbors that are not playing politics? Don't you see, we are so far beyond Republican and Democrats, it doesn't even matter anymore. They are racing the branches of government, and now our president says it's okay to assassinate American citizens. Where are the people that really actually believe in something? Look, we can disagree in America. You might hate my guts. That's okay. That's all right. But we have to have an honest debate, and with that, we have to have principles. Where does this administration actually stand? Where do you actually stand? They will tell you one thing, but they'll do the exact opposite. I'm sorry, match this blackboard with this blackboard.
Jake.
You said that Awlaki was demonstrably and provably involved in operations. Do you plan on demonstrating?
You know, I should step back. He is clearly, I mean, provably may be a legal term. I think it has been well established, and it has certainly been the position of this administration and the previous administration, that he is a leader in, was a leader in AQAP, that AQAP was a definite threat, was operational, planned, and carried out terrorist attacks that fortunately did not succeed, but were extremely serious, including the ones specifically that I mentioned in terms of the would-be Christmas Day bombing in 2009 and the attempt to bomb numerous cargo planes headed for the United States. And he was obviously also an active recruiter of al-Qaeda terrorists. So I don't think anybody in the field would dispute any of those assertions.
You don't think anybody else in the government would dispute?
I think I wouldn't know of any credible terrorist expert who would dispute the fact that he was a leader in al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula and that he was operationally involved in terrorist attacks against American interests and citizens.
Do you plan on bringing before the public any proof of these charges?
Again, this is the question. Makes us, you know, it has embedded within it assumptions about the circumstances of his death that I'm just not going to address.
How on earth does it have? What is it? I really don't understand. How do he's dead? You were asserting that he had operational control of the cargo plot and the Abdul Muttalib plot. He's now dead. Can you show us, or the American people, or has a judge been shown?
Well, again, Jake, I'm not going to go any further than what I've said about the circumstances of his death and the case against them, which again you're linking, and I think that
you said that he was responsible for these things.
Yes, but again,
is there going to be any evidence presented?
You know, I don't have anything for you on that.
Do you not see at all? Does the administration not see at all how a president asserting that he has the right to kill an American citizen without due process, and that he's not going to even explain why he thinks he has that right, is troublesome to some people?
I wasn't aware of any of those things that you said actually happening, and again, I'm not going to address the circumstances of Awlaki's death. I think it's, again, it is an important fact that this terrorist who was actively plotting, had plotted in the past and was actively plotting to attack Americans and American interests, is dead. But I'm not going to, from any angle, discuss the circumstances of his death.
You know that the Center for Constitutional Rights and the ACLU tried to get permission to represent Awlaki. His father had asked them to do that, but they needed to get permission from the Treasury Department, and so that they could challenge his being on this targeted killing list. And the administration, the Obama administration, refused to let them represent him. To not even, he couldn't even have the ACLU representing him.
Well, I would send those questions or take those questions to Treasury or Justice. I don't have anything on that for you.
What do you think constitutional law professor Barack Obama would think of this?
I think he spoke about it today.
the post-9/11 atmosphere that really worries me. It worries me about how much our CIA is involved overseas. And this week, I could not believe a headline that said the president was considering the legality of assassinating an American citizen. No, that's true. It's true. He was born in this country, and he's a Muslim, and he's identified to be with people who don't like us. So they want to declare him an enemy combatant, which they can do by, like the Attorney General, the President, oh, he's an enemy combatant, and therefore he has no rights. Well, you say, well, yeah, but he's a terrorist. Well, no, he is maybe a suspect, and nothing has been proven, and he might be a bad guy. But is that the way you take care of bad guys, talking in the White House about assassinating this guy? I mean, what happens if conditions get really bad and we start talking to each other about some of the terrible things that Washington, D.C. is going to us? Are we going to be enemy combatants? Because the precedent has been set already for American citizens to be in prison indefinitely. This is why we should protect the civil liberties of all suspects, and we shouldn't be putting people in prison in secret rendition and without a trial, without due process, without an attorney, and then on top of that, add on torture. That, to me, is not what America is all about. So these fears that I have and that you may have is connected to the economic system, because if the economic system breaks down, then there's going to be more challenges. People, most Americans endorse the idea that after 9/11, oh, we're under attack. What do you want us to do? And just so many times I would hear, even if going through the lines at the airport, well, if this is what it takes, you know, we have to give up some of our freedoms to be free. And, you know, it was said a while ago, which I strongly endorse, that you don't have to give up your liberties to be free. Matter of fact, if you give them up, you can't be free. And yet a lot of people believe that. And if we have turmoil in this country, the same thing is going to happen. Yes, there will be a lot of poverty and a lot of problems and law and order breakdown. They say, well, do whatever you can to make us safe and secure. Governments can't make you safe and secure. Do you think you're safe in your house because there's a policeman guarding your house? You're probably more safe in your house because of the Second Amendment than you are because of a policeman. But because of the threat and the undermining of our civil liberties and the possibility of losing the right of habeas corpus, and the potential of our system breaking down, this is why the monetary system is so important.
Stories. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The Obama administration's acknowledged it's continuing a Bush-era policy authorizing the killing of U.S. citizens abroad. The confirmation came from Director of National Intelligence Dennis Blair in congressional testimony last week. Blair told the House Intelligence Committee U.S. forces can assassinate Americans believed to be involved in terrorist activity against the United States. Blair said, quote, being a U.S. citizen will not spare an American from getting assassinated by military or intelligence operatives overseas if the individual is working with terrorists and planning to attack fellow Americans. He added, we don't target people for free speech. We target them for taking action that threatens Americans. Blair's comments came 1 week after the Washington Post reported at least 3 U.S. citizens are on hit lists maintained by the CIA and the Joint Special Operations Command. The most well-known target is the U.S.-born cleric Anwar al-Awlaki, who is accused of having ties to the failed Christmas Day airline bombing and the shooting at Fort Hood. My first 2 guests have been among the most vocal critics of the continued assassination policy. Democratic Congressmember Dennis Kucinich joins us from Washington, D.C., Last week, he wrote a letter to Attorney General Eric Holder requesting an explanation of the Obama administration's legal basis for the extrajudicial killing of U.S. citizens. And we're joined on the telephone by Glenn Greenwald, a constitutional law attorney and political and legal blogger for Salon.com. He wrote a widely circulated piece for Salon last week called Presidential Assassinations of U.S. Citizens. Let's begin with Congressmember Dennis Kucinich. Explain what you wrote to Attorney General Holder.
Well, I think it's incumbent upon the Attorney General to explain the basis in law for such a policy. Our Constitution's Fifth Amendment, our Seventh Amendment, our 14th Amendment, all clearly provide legal protections for people who are accused or who would be sentenced after having been judged to be guilty. And what's happened is that the Constitution is being vitiated here. The idea that people are if their life is in jeopardy, legally have law, is thrown out the window. And, Amy, when you consider that there are people who are claiming there are many terrorist cells in the United States, it doesn't take too much of a stretch to imagine that this policy could easily be transferred to citizens in this country. That only compounds what I think is a slow and steady detachment from core constitutional principles. And once that happens, we have a country then that loses its memory and its soul with respect to being disconnected from those core constitutional principles which are the basis of freedom in our society.
Glenn Greenwald, you've been writing about this extensively. Can you talk about your major objections and where you think this policy is going?
Well, first of all, look at the controversies that Democrats and progressives were so vocal about during the Bush years. They objected vehemently over the Bush administration's wiretapping of American citizens without any court warrants or judicial oversight. They objected when the Bush administration put not American citizens but foreign nationals into cages at Guantanamo merely on the say-so of the president that these people were terrorists. Here you're talking about the worst elements of those policies, but even more extreme. You're talking about American citizens not being merely wiretapped by the president with no oversight, but murdered, assassinated, killed, based solely on the unchecked say-so of the president. And I think what really has to be emphasized is look at how many times over the past decade that the administration, first the Bush administration and the Obama administration, has accused people of being terrorists, the worst of the worst, and it turned out that they were completely wrong. Hundreds of people who were at Guantanamo ended up being released because there was no evidence of wrongdoing. Ever since the Supreme Court in 2008 granted habeas corpus rights to detainees, 33 out of 39 Guantanamo detainees who brought their cases before a court were ordered released by federal judges on the grounds that there was no evidence to justify the accusations against them. So there are a few things more dangerous than allowing the executive branch to label people terrorists and treat them accordingly, and that danger is compounded severely when you're talking about American citizens who have constitutional rights and talking about not merely eavesdropping on them or imprisoning them, but actually murdering them.
Glenn, you quote a 1981 executive order signed by Ronald Reagan.
Right. Well, you know, assassinations have a very long and sordid history in the United States, and the reason is that the CIA has used assassinations as a major weapon in its arsenal, so much so that they've assassinated people who ended up being wrongly killed, who ended up causing great controversy because it's extrajudicial killings, and even Ronald Reagan, who engaged in all sorts of extreme policies in Central America, waging covert war, declared political assassinations of political leaders to be illegal. Now that applies only to political assassinations, not necessarily to assassinations of people accused of terrorism, but the principle is the same, that these kind of extrajudicial killings, which we condemn when virtually every other country does, was so extreme, so contrary to our values, that even Ronald Reagan issued an executive order banning it, and now here's President Obama doing it, again, not with regard to foreign nationals or to foreign leaders who we accuse of all kinds of extremities, but United States citizens, in the case of al-Awlaki, born and raised and educated in the United States, and it's as severe and extreme a policy as can be imagined.
So, Congressmember Dennis Kucinich, what can you do about this in Congress?
Well, Congress has the authority under a joint resolution to challenge any presidential directive. It's not widely known, Amy, but there are at least 3 states of national emergency that we're operating under right now by presidential declaration. One relating to 9/11, another one relating to the war on terror, and a third one relating to Iran. You know, this idea of being governed by an edict, of being locked into this war on terror, poses all kinds of challenges to our Constitution. Now, I take an oath to defend the Constitution, and when I see in the Fifth Amendment where it says that no one should be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, I want to know what's the constitutional basis for suspending this provision for anyone, even for a moment. Because if this in any sense can be set aside, then we are on a slippery slope to anti-democracy. And I think that the reason why this is important for the Attorney General to reflect upon is that the President and all federal officials take an oath to defend that Constitution. This is the Constitution. If they're saying that the authorization for the use of military force passed after 9/11 is the basis for this action, we should know that they're saying that. But a fair reading of that said that it applied only to those who were involved in 9/11, not someone who joins an organization later on, no matter how misguided or wrong-headed that may be, that is seen to be a threat to the U.S., that someone can just say, well, you know, you're done, you're dead. You know, what about the right to be able to be told of the charges against you? What about the right to a trial? What about the right to be able to be presented by your accusers? This is a dangerous moment, and either I see it as a constitutional crisis, and Congress has to start stepping up to review these actions without regard to whether it's a Democrat or Republican administration.
Do you have support among your colleagues, Congressman Kucinich?
I just raised this issue in the last week, and it's been snowing here, so I'll be speaking to my colleagues about that when I see them. I'm here. I'm hopeful that this week there'll still be some sessions of Congress so we can begin the discussion.
The Constitution, my dear people, of the United States of America is under attack in various ways. Yes, my dear people, and we want you to see these things in such a clip as this.
The U.S. Supreme Court issued a landmark decision that serves to allow judges to void the Constitution in their courtrooms. The decision was issued on January 18, 2011, and the court did not even explain the decision. Docket number 10-632, docket number 10-633, and docket number 10-690. One-word decision: denied. Presented with the information and mass proof that was not contested in any manner by the accused judges, at least 6 of the justices voted to deny the petition. There is no legal or factual basis whatsoever for the decision of the lower courts in this matter. These rulings were issued for corrupt reasons. Many of the judges in the North District of Georgia and the 11th Circuit are corrupt and violate laws and rules, as they have done in this case. The Supreme Court must recognize the petition as one of the most serious matters ever presented to this court. By denying the petitions, SCOTUS has chosen to sanction corruption by federal judges and to allow federal judges to void sections of the Constitution at will.
Seems to me this is one of the most important cases today in the courts. For years they've been stealing our constitutional rights little by little, chipping away at it. Now they have huge, decisive chunks. I do not believe we have any constitutional rights anymore. We are in a police state. The judges are free to do whatever they choose. There are no constitutional federal laws to bind them. The mainstream media is not covering this story at all. Complete media blackout.
The Constitution of the United States of America. We the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. Our country is under attack. The very Constitution upon which our country is founded, the greatest law of the land, is under attack. Article 2 of our Constitution states that no person except a natural-born citizen shall be eligible to the office of the President. The Constitution was established 221 years ago, and it has served our country well. But now we have a man who has come along and wants to change the greatest nation on earth. But this man refuses, flatly refuses to prove that he is eligible under Article 2 of the Constitution of the United States of America. Barack Hussein Obama has flatly refused to provide any proof in federal court that he is a natural-born citizen of the United States of America. If we care about our Constitution, then we do not have the right to elect someone who is not a natural-born citizen. If Obama refuses to prove that he is qualified, we must assume that he is not. Every American who does vote has a constitutional duty to vote against him. A vote for him is a vote against the Constitution of the United States of America.
Turn to Judge Andrew Napolitano about a story that came to me this morning. Katie Abram is a mom who laid into Arlen Specter in a firm but respectful way, gave him an earful on what she thought about government-run health care. She called me this morning on my radio program. She had been up all night. She wrote me a letter at 4:45 this morning. She said, "I'm afraid." Here's a piece of what she said on the radio show.
The phone call I got, some coward called me. I don't know how he got my cell phone number. He said something, and then he called me a racist.
She went on. I talked to her for about 10 minutes. It was one of the most powerful phone calls. You can hear it. It'll be available on my website at glennbeck.com. It was one of the most powerful segments we've had in quite some time. Here's a regular person, and she was saying, "Glenn, I didn't realize I was walking into a buzzsaw. Judge, what can people do? They're trying to intimidate and scare people to sit in and..."
Isn't it funny? The liberals are liberal about everything but liberty. They don't want you to exercise your most fundamental liberties if it's an obstacle to their big government plans. Here's what she can do. Any effort to intimidate her free speech by a private person, by somebody from the government, by somebody from the government pretending to be a private person, violates the Constitution and federal law.
So what do? You get a phone call, your cell phone, what do you do?
You record every phone call. You keep your cell phone with you. I've said this line, and I commend it to you. If you're in a situation where it's not easy for you to get a handgun, the camera is the new gun. Whenever anybody comes near you that expresses an opinion to you, from the government or elsewise, record what they say. Video if you can, audio at least. Second, you can file any kind of a complaint 24 hours a day with the local police. You can file with the FBI between 9 and 5. You can actually get them in the middle of the night if necessary as well. Why the FBI? Because your right to speak freely is protected by the federal Constitution, and any interference with the federal right, the FBI has to investigate.
You know what? They are trying to keep people in their house.
Right.
Because the republic cannot stand if people do not stand for the republic. You know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean.
And it's not going to be, unlike everything else in this world, and I've said this for a while, they're going bigger government, bigger everything. The answer is the individual.
Correct. This wonderful woman who called you, this wonderful woman who challenged Arlen Specter in a way that we all watched and admired.
She was fine.
She's now being threatened and being intimidated. She and everyone like her needs to remember, Glenn, the reason we have free speech today is because people like her 200 years ago were willing to challenge authority and not to be intimidated about it.
I want you to know, we're not saying that Arlen Specter had anything to do with it. As far as we know, Arlen Specter has been a gentleman the whole time. I wildly disagree with him, but he presented himself as a gentleman at these town hall meetings.
About a week and a half ago, we learned that the Justice Department had twisted arms in the Texas State Senate to block a unanimous House vote to criminally ban the molestation of Texas citizens at airports at the hands of the federal goon force, the TSA. And so in about an hour and a half, we had a crowd of over 100 people show up spontaneously down at the Texas State Capitol, and we marched in to that Capitol and went to the steps of the Senate floor where the police blocked us and let them know in no uncertain terms that we were not their slaves. So I said, we got to go down there and we got to let these people know we don't appreciate what they're doing. This criminal government will follow the will of the people and the Constitution. Liberty is only rising. We have only begun to fight, and we will fight everywhere. And we will never surrender. Treason! 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 It is not government's job to basically bully and dominate the population. And the Texas State Police did the right thing. They did not behave as tyrants, and they protected our right to go into our Capitol building that our tax money built with our public servants who serve us, so that we could tell them that we were very displeased with them. The First Amendment is king. The right of religion, the right of the press, the right to protest, to assemble, the right to petition. It's all there in the First Amendment. And the First Amendment's under attack. It started under Clinton with no protest zones. They put you in free speech zones. It expanded under Bush, and now under Obama, it has exploded. One of my great camera guys, Rob Dew, was arrested at G20 in Pittsburgh for just trying to film the police attacking peaceful crowds. When the crowds dispersed, the police then went to the local university with people out at the park at night and told them nobody allowed out at night. All part of a bullying exercise against citizens. We saw the same thing a year and a half ago in Kansas City, and the Kansas City Star picked it up. My guys were a half mile away from the private Federal Reserve branch bank, the folks that have stolen $27 trillion of U.S. taxpayer money. And the Federal Reserve had private security guards with guns come off the Federal Reserve property, drive a half mile where they saw my guys getting a distant shot of the Federal Reserve for B-roll for an upcoming film. And these goons, off their jurisdiction, off their private property, came over with their guns, said, give us your IDs. They gave them the IDs. Because I've told my guys to try to not get, in an altercation. These folks think they're God. And Rob and Aaron said, well, we're here at a World War I memorial that is a city park. You're off your jurisdiction. You're not even a federal officer. You're a security guard. And the guys said, look, get out of here. It's going to get bad.
You can go to jail or you can leave. Are you a police officer, sir? We do have arrest powers. Do you want to go to jail? Am I under arrest? No, you're not under arrest. Not yet. You need to leave. You're encroaching on our First Amendment right. No, we are not.
You see, there's this idea that when we've been in D.C., just filming the Washington Monument, security guards march over, then police and say, can't film. And we say, oh, really? We called to get a permit, and the city is permit-free because it's freedom. You're allowed to have video cameras. But we just wanted to see what would happen. And it's happened to other film crews that I know that go to D.C. with mainline television. There's this attitude of letting you know that you're a little slave. And we see this all over the country. I've seen police, it's happened to myself in New York. It's happened to We Are Change. It's in our film Truth Rising. Walk over and say, turn your camera off, just when you're on a street corner. You go, why? And some cop that can barely speak English starts threatening you.
This is a private. Well, listen, you want me to take that camera, or you want to show me what you filmed?
This is the essence of losing our freedoms. If government can trample on the Bill of Rights and Constitution, they can take your private property rights. They can take your pensions. They can search your home without warrants. And courts are now ruling all over the country, federal and state, along these lines. We're in a very dangerous time. And that's why I am proud of Texas. Because I went in there like a wild rhinoceros with my First Amendment, letting them know that we were outraged and tired of being sexually abused. We can't fly down to Mexico on a holiday and go to the beach, because I will not watch my children have people grab their genitals. And that's a normal response. They're trying to break our will, to condition us. But the good news is more and more the TSA is saying they're going to try to back off of the body scanners. Congress is moving to cut the funding, so they can't buy more scanners, and so they can't upkeep the others that microwave oven you, because they know that they've unified the people against them on a nonpartisan issue. Liberal, conservative, libertarian, socialist, doesn't matter. Nobody likes this, and we all know it's a joke. It's security theater. Now, that said, look at what happened with a group of demonstrators that peacefully went into the Jefferson Memorial, Mr. Liberty, and simply, quietly, silently danced. They did that because months previous, on Jefferson's birthday, a group of libertarians via Twitter said, hey, let's go meet up, like-minded people at the Jefferson Memorial at night. Nobody's there, it's open, and let's, dance. They got arrested then. And when you watch these cops, arrogantly, they say, what's the law? They won't even tell them. They won't talk to you. You're scum. You'll follow their orders. They couldn't tell them the law. There is no law. They have a federal ruling saying it should be solemn. Well, that federal ruling violates the First Amendment. I mean, speech may not be fun for some people, but it's absolutely paramount in this country. It's why it's the First Amendment, even before the Second. And the cops begin to tackle people, choke people. When they begin to speak back to the godlike police, the policemen begin to shove them. And it just shows you how far our country's fallen. They are trying to sell us on tyranny in the name of security. If we don't have our basic liberties, America isn't America anymore.
Well, to the campaign trail now, police and prosecutors in Missouri forming a so-called truth squad for the Democratic White House hopeful. The squad targets anyone who runs a misleading or false ad about Obama, and the controversy comes because, as I said, some of those in the truth squad are state and county prosecutors and sheriffs. Here's one of them.
We want to keep this campaign focused on issues. We don't want people to get distracted, and Missourians don't want to be distracted by these divisive character attacks. So we're here to respond to any character attacks, to set the record straight.
Whether it is directly attributable to the campaign or to one of the soft money operations, if they're not going to tell the truth, then somebody's got to step up and say, wait a minute, that's not true, this is the truth.
Well, one of the people not happy about this is the governor of Missouri, Matt Blunt.
A new rule announced today, backed by the force of law and the threat of fines and felony charges. A rule that will prevent reporters and photographers and anyone else from getting anywhere close to booms and oil-soaked wildlife in just about any place we need to be. By now, you're probably familiar with cleanup crews stiff-arming the media, private security blocking cameras, ordinary workers clamming up, some not even saying who they're working for because they're afraid of losing their jobs. BP has said again and again that's not their policy, yet again and again it has happened. We've seen it. But that's BP. Now the government apparently is getting in on the act, despite what Admiral Thad Allen promised about transparency just nearly a month ago. Here's what he said back then.
I have put out a written directive, and I can provide it for the record, that says the media will have uninhibited access anywhere we're doing operations, except for two things: if it's a security or a safety problem. That is my policy.
Uninhibited access unless it's a security or safety problem. Well, the Coast Guard today announced new rules keeping photographers and reporters and anyone else from coming within 65 feet of any response vessel or booms out on the water or on beaches. 65 feet. Now, in order to get closer, you have to get direct permission from the Coast Guard captain of the Port of New Orleans. You have to call up the guy. What this means is that oil-soaked birds on islands surrounded by boom, you can't get close enough to take that picture. Shots of oil on beaches with booms, stay 65 feet away. Pictures of oil-soaked booms uselessly laying in the water because they haven't been collected like they should, you can't get close enough to see that. And believe me, that is out there. But you only know that if you get close to it, and now you can't without permission. Violators could face a fine of $40,000 and Class D felony charges. What's even more extraordinary is that the Coast Guard tried to make the exclusion zone 300 feet before scaling it back to 65 feet. Here's how Admiral Allen defends it.
It's not unusual at all for the Coast Guard to establish either safety or security zones around any number of facilities or activities for public safety and for the safety of the equipment itself. We would do this for marine events, fireworks demonstrations, cruise ships going in and out of port.
So this is the exact same logic that federal wildlife officials used to prevent CNN on 2 occasions from getting pictures of oiled birds that have been collected. Pictures that we're about to show you, which are obviously deeply disturbing. Pictures of oiled gulls that we just happened to catch. Suddenly we were told after that day we couldn't catch it anymore. So keeping prying eyes out of marshes, away from booms, off the beaches is now government policy. When asked why now, after all this time, Thad Allen said he'd gotten some complaints from local officials worried people might get hurt. Now, we don't know who these officials are. We'd like to, but transparency is apparently not a high priority with Thad Allen either these days. Maybe he's accurate, and some officials are concerned, and that's their right. But we've heard far more from local officials about not being able to get a straight story from the government or BP. I've met countless local officials desperate for pictures to be taken and stories written about what is happening in their communities. We're not the enemy here. Those of us down here trying to accurately show what is happening, we are not the enemy.
Now here's something you have a right to know about the Constitution. According to the Wall Street Journal, the National Security Agency will now monitor online activity. That's the federal government looking at the internet in a massive ongoing program with the creepy name Perfect Citizen. They say they're looking for anything that might be a cyber attack by terrorists or a foreign government. A U.S. military official, according to the Journal, said this program is no more intrusive than having security cameras all over the streets. He might be right about that. But the Constitution says we have a right to be secure from searches and seizures by the government done without warrants issued by judges. What is constant surveillance of innocent citizens if not a search without a warrant? Let's see. The government works for us. We should monitor the government. When it monitors us, that's a violation of the Fourth Amendment and a violation of your natural right to be left alone.
It is good. Let's talk about God and the Constitution, Mika.
Good. I looked
Governor Mike Huckabee yesterday.
Here we go.
I have opponents in this race who do not want to change the Constitution. But I believe it's a lot easier to change the Constitution than it would be to change the Word of the living God. And that's what we need to do, is to amend the Constitution so it's in God's standards rather than try to change God's standards so it lines up with some contemporary view of how we treat each other and how we treat the family.
These following clips explain about the Super Congress that has now been set up in the United States of America. Pay attention to that.
Hey, what's happening, guys? Joey B here. I got a few articles I want to bring to your guys' attention. This one here, it's from July 25th, 2011, and it says, the disturbing Super Congress that is being created as part of the debt negotiations. And we'll see what it says down here. It says, there is some very alarming news coming out of the debt negotiations. Hidden in any deal may be the creation of a Super Congress that would result in more power being placed in the hands of the super elitists and dilute the influence of the average congressman. The left is most up in arms about this development, as it would likely mean that cuts to Medicare and Social Security would be easier to get through Congress. But it could also result in the elimination of tax credits for retirement savings plans and the elimination of the tax deduction for mortgage interest payments. The Super Congress would place more power in the hands of Washington, D.C. power players and limit the power of the average congressman. Ryan Grimm explains how this Super Congress would work, a joint committee that both House Speaker Boehner and the President are in favor of. Of course they are. Debt ceiling negotiators think they've hit on a solution to address the debt ceiling impasse and the public's unwillingness to let go of benefits such as Medicare and Social Security that have been earned over a lifetime of work. Create a new Congress. The Super Congress, composed of members of both chambers and both parties, isn't mentioned anywhere in the Constitution, but would be granted extraordinary new powers. Under a plan put forth by Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, and his counterpart, Majority Leader Harry Reid, legislation to lift the debt ceiling would be accompanied by the creation of a 12-member panel made up of 12 lawmakers, 6 from each chamber and 6 from each party. Legislation approved by the Super Congress, which some on Capitol Hill are calling the Super Committee, would then be fast-tracked through both chambers where it couldn't be amended by simple regular lawmakers who'd have the ability to cast an up or down vote. With the weight of both leaderships behind it, a product originated by the Super Congress would have a strong chance of moving through the Little Congress and quickly becoming law.
The final vote yesterday turned up 174 from the Republicans and 95 Democrats, voting in favor of Obama's Hitler coup, agreed upon at the White House Sunday meeting. The bill to authorize a Supreme Congress to act on and initiate an additional trillions worth of cuts, whether the actual legislative body of the federal government approves of it or not.
In his subversion of the United States Constitution, Mr. Obama and his administration has arrogantly attacked the first right of religious liberty, the first right, the Religious Amendment Clause of the United States of America. What they have done to do this is explained in these clips. Pay attention.
Barack Obama carried the Catholic vote in 2008. Vice President Biden and former Chief of Staff Daley, both Catholics, said to the president, according to Politico, don't do this. Give the waiver. It's an easy waiver to give, that any nonprofit church-based organization doesn't have to fund birth control, morning after pill, any of that stuff. Give the waiver. President Obama considered it, but then listened to his Health Secretary Sebelius, all right, formerly the governor of Kansas and a big supporter of Tiller. You remember the late-term abortion doctor was assassinated.
I sure do.
And Sebelius said, no, Mr. President, this is a woman's rights issue. So you have to come down on the side of women's rights and reject the religious issue. And that's how he made his decision.
I think that's a misreading of the whole situation, and nobody will agree with me, especially you, Bill. But what this president is interested in is radical transformation. Why else would a president do what he's just done? It makes no sense. This guy does it. Please. If you want to get elected, this makes no sense on any level. Really? The Catholic Church? You're going to go after the Catholics?
If Obama makes the decision to alienate many, many people, not only Catholics, he loses votes. Yes. He gives the Republicans a big cannon against him. That has happened. He sure does. That has happened. Why would he do that?
And not only, wait a minute, not only votes, but Hispanic votes.
Okay, so why would he do it? Why would he do it?
Exactly right. Why would he do it? Yeah. Because he wants people on the streets. He wants people. He wants that confrontation. You get the people who are active down at the bottoms. You get the Occupy Wall Street. You get people so incensed they get out on the streets. Then the people in the middle say, come on, somebody's got to stop this. The top comes down, and it turns the whole thing inside out. It's a strategy that George Soros has talked about, Van Jones has talked about. Everybody...
Not buying it.
We have to stand together. Faith is under attack. Conscience is under attack. And if you continue to blow it off, it will be too late.
I don't think people are blowing this off.
Federal government to violate their religious beliefs.
The current administration's efforts to challenge the conscience and reproductive rights of the Catholic Church or any other religion will not and should not be tolerated.
Holy moly, talk about your out-of-control stories. Welcome, everybody. I'm Neil Cavuto, and hell hath no fury, like a lot of furious Catholics and a lot of furious folks who aren't even Catholics. Phone banks on Capitol Hill swamped. Many congressional email systems, we're told, bombarded. A holy uproar, the likes of which this town has not seen since the great health care debate. And ironically, the very same issue that is triggering this avalanche of anger right now, a requirement in that very law that religious organizations include birth control coverage in their health care plans. Not only a moral no-no for Catholics, to put it mildly, but a case of state stomping on church for a whole bunch of non-Catholics as well. That big, that fiery, and as I said, that holy a war. Reports the White House is trying to dial this back. But my next guest here to say there's only one solution, Mr. President, take it back, take it completely back. Cardinal Donald Wuerl calls it an assault on religious liberty. His Eminence, the Archbishop of Washington, joining me exclusively now. Cardinal, good to have you.
Thank you. It's good to be with you.
Did you expect this reaction, first off? It began with cardinals like you know, bringing people's attention to it, but it now has become a holy brush fire.
Well, I think what's happening is the more people learn what is at stake here, the more people are speaking up. It's not just a Catholic issue. It's an issue that touches all faith-based communities, all religions, all organizations that draw their inspiration from their faith. And I think what's happening across the country is the more people learn about this mandate, the more they're saying, this is wrong, this is just not right.
So for you, Cardinal, the issue is this the state stomping on the church, more or less, right? Just telling you to violate your conscience, or is it bigger than that?
Well, I think the issue is whether or not all of us, all of the faith-based entities, all of the churches have a place in the work of the common good. You know, the Catholic Church has been at this service of people for centuries here in what is our country, long before there were even a Republican or Democratic Party, long before there was an HHS. The Catholic Church was providing education, health care, charitable services, all kinds of outreach and care for the poor. We shouldn't be told we can't do that any longer unless we accept to pay for things that we simply aren't able to accept. That's really at the heart of it. And I think when people begin to see the issue here is freedom, the issue is religious liberty, the issue is the right of all of us, Catholic, Protestant, Jew, Muslim, anyone, to participate in the life of this country with all of the institutions, all of the charitable works, all of the educational efforts that we bring. We shouldn't be told we're simply excluded because of this mandate.
But this mandate is something that a number of senators on the Hill have said it's surprising you would oppose, sir. Senators Sheehan, Boxer, and Murray are putting a column out today that I'm sure you might have caught, where they referred to the broadening access to birth control that will help reduce the number of unintended pregnancies and abortion, a goal we all should share. Going on to say religious freedom means that Catholic women who want this have access to this. What do you say?
These things are already available. All you have to do is walk into a drugstore and you realize all these contraceptives are available. With a prescription, you can get drugs that induce abortions. You can go to a hospital and be sterilized. All these things that the mandate insists on, you can get right now. The difference is we're being told now people who find these things abhorrent have to pay for them. That's the big difference. These are accessible. They're out there. People can access them, can have them. What this mandate is saying is those of you who find that an abortifacient morally offensive, you have to pay for it. That's the new rule, and that's what we're objecting to. And that's what's new in the history of this mandate. That's what's new in the history of our country. We've never been told you can't participate in the good works of the common good unless you violate your conscience.
Let me ask you then, Cardinal, there are a number of folks who say that, you know, Catholic hospitals, charities, receive government funds, many of them get specific tax benefits. So there's a long history of asking these institutions to play by the same rules as other public institutions. You say that is not the case.
We've always participated in the life of the country. Remember, we all pay taxes. That money comes from all of us. And when that money is assigned to do good works, we've always been a part of the delivery system. Whether you were Catholic, Protestant, Jewish, whatever your faith background, you weren't asked to compromise that in order to participate in the good works of this country. But that's what's happening now.
Now, the president now, Cardinal, is apparently trying to, as I said earlier, sir, dial this back, try to make a bridge to the Catholic leadership and to religious leaders, period. What does he have to do to satisfy you or to ease your concerns?
Well, I think what's at issue here is the mandate itself. The question of, is this simply overreach. And what can be done? What type of a compromise can be worked out? I don't know, because I haven't heard any proposals. But when you start dealing with your constitutional rights, when you start dealing with those, the Bill of Rights, the 10 amendments to the Constitution, are we saying you can keep some and trade in others? You know, it reminds me once when I was teaching a youngster about the 10 Commandments, and he said, "Do you have to follow all of them at the same time?"
Well, you know, Carl, that kid was me in school. I thought, if you get 6 or 7 out of 10, is that technically passing?
Many of you may have noticed that the Obama administration has declared war on the Catholic Church and other religious institutions. I want you to know that on the very first day, I will sign an executive order repealing every anti-religious act of the Obama administration.
This is what happens when you give elites power. The whole idea of power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. The more power you give to this government, the less freedom you have.
So how will this hotly debated issue impact the vote in November?
And he has said very clearly that when he went to the Oval Office, and this is after Archbishop Dolan and the bishops had asked for an exemption from the Obamacare mandate that we just talked about here, asked for an exemption saying, hey, listen, we are providing unbelievable amounts of social services in the United States of America. We will not violate our conscience by providing things that we don't believe in.
Yeah. Well,
and you know what President Obama told him? He says, don't worry. And he said this publicly, I'm not revealing anything. He said, don't worry. It's going to work out much better than you expect.
Well, wait a minute.
And you know what's happened? It's been worse than we expected. He's forcing us to violate our conscience.
Right, but wait, this is important for this reason, because if they back off this, it will only be for political reasons. They can't say that the president was not involved in the decision-making. Now, as far as I'm concerned, this is a war against our Constitution, the First Amendment, freedom of religion, the free exercise thereof. Tell me where I'm wrong.
John, I see it differently. 98% of Catholic women use contraception. 60% support this very measure. Doctors who want to opt out can opt out.
Wait a minute. Catholic universities, Catholic hospitals, Catholic charitable enterprises cannot opt out.
And they're given a year to make peace with this. And you know what?
Peace with it?
White House,
wait a minute.
David Axelrod said today on TV that he was absolutely prepared to negotiate with Catholic institutions.
After the fact.
Sean,
right, but we want to come together.
Let's set the record straight. Do you know what, Doug, look at me here.
No, I will.
Okay, that's good.
I like
that. You know what they've said? We've come halfway. We've offered olive branches. You know what the 2 olive branches they've offered? They've said, number 1, as long as you're only ministering or serving people of your own faith, you get an exemption. You think a Catholic? You think a Catholic hospital is going to be checking baptismal certificates at the door to make sure that they're Catholic? Wait.
Any
Doug, let me
doctor
finish.
that wants to opt out should be able to opt out.
They're not. Wait a minute. But they're not allowed.
But that's
Sean,
what
this is the first
Axelrod
one.
was talking about
Only
today.
now. Wait a minute. Only now because of political considerations.
But that's what we live in, a political
When it came down to
society.
the First Amendment and it came down to people's conscience and the right of the free exercise thereof, this president chose contraception over freedom of religion. That's why this is important.
Absolutely. You know what the second exemption
What's
is?
your second exemption?
They said, you know what? Don't worry about it. We're going to meet you halfway. You've got a whole year to get ready to violate your conscience.
Well, to do what Axelrod said today, which is to try to find common ground so that extended affiliated institutions, not Catholic churches.
Right, let me play something. Let's expand this here.
Hospital has a year to violate its conscience?
No, to work out a way to make everybody comfortable with giving people access
violating your conscience.
Giving access to contraception.
And your
to
deeply
those who
held
want it.
religious
Those
views.
who don't want to provide will not provide.
No, excuse me. That is not what they decided, because after he met with the bishop in the Oval Office and called the bishop and said, sorry, it's not going to go your way. Is that what he said to him?
That's exactly what's happened. You know, he said that he promised. Remember, Sean, remember this great speech in Notre Dame?
Yes.
In which Notre Dame University, I think, in a very shameful way, decided to give him an honor.
He said he would honor religious.
What did he say? He said,
liberty.
This is all about us sharing values, but then recognizing that we will also respect the freedom of conscience
That's
and
what
the
he
freedom
said.
of religion.
Wait a minute.
And
Let me air this because we're running out of time.
What he has done is said, I will not respect freedom of conscience because I believe, as you said, Sean, very well, contraception being provided by a church.
He chose that over religious liberty.
That's
right.
it.
All right, let me
Very
show
simple.
the president. This is what he said in Turkey back in April of 2009. Let's roll this tape.
Mentioned, we have a very large Christian population. We do not consider ourselves a Christian nation or a Jewish nation or a Muslim nation. We consider ourselves a nation of citizens who are bound by ideals and a set of values.
Wait a minute. Was this country or not founded on Judeo-Christian principles?
But
That's
not
correct.
edicts. And freedom of choice is preserved. Axelrod says he's going to work to...
That's not what he said.
...to facilitate the interests of these extended affiliated institutions, to give Catholic women who use contraception...
Axelrod is playing politics. He's backing off because the Catholic Church, by the way, which I am often critical of for not being strong enough, has finally stood up and they said, no.
Sean, let me say,
they bought into...
this is also, I believe, a bigger picture that the Catholic Church and other Christian churches are going to get involved in, and that is the reach of government.
Look,
this is not only religious liberty. First of all, this is not about contraception. This is about religious liberty.
Also about
you know what? This is
morning
also
after
about
pill and abortion.
Absolutely.
I disagree with you. This is going to cost the Republicans more votes.
You are...
No, I know you disagree.
Because liberal Catholics, and Father, with all due respect, there are plenty of liberal Catholics out there.
The conservative Catholics are against Obama.
But it's also the evangelical community and Protestants and Catholics and Christians.
The evangelicals are against Obama, too.
No, well, but I'm telling you, there's a lot of liberal Catholics. I'm a Catholic.
Himself to the right. I understand.
Doug.
Romney's forced himself to the right.
Doug.
This is going to hurt him with swing voters.
Doug, Sister Carol Keehan was President Obama's hero for supporting the health care law, Obamacare.
Right.
She has come out and said, you have abandoned us.
I understand that there will be individual
these are
Catholics.
It's not individuals, it's universal.
This is going to be a freedom issue that will work to his advantage.
Just like when he said the chaplains for our military couldn't read the bishop's letter at Mass.
Look, I'm for freedom of choice. They should be able to read the letter.
They were dictated
but they should
not
also
to.
be able to have access to contraception.
Excuse me, that's your value system. And that's not for the government to decide. If you have freedom of religion and the free exercise thereof, it's none of your business, frankly,
Sean,
or Obama's business.
This is not a Catholic issue. This is not a conservative issue.
62% of Catholics who want access to contraception. I don't think we should be dictating.
That's individual. The government, you're missing the point. The government is deciding that people cannot have freedom of religion.
They're not telling people.
No, they're insisting that you have that plan. They're insisting you provide these services.
Services to people who want them.
Through your health care.
If you don't want them, you don't take them.
You have to provide it.
This is not about a choice of deciding I want contraception. It's an obligation of the employers
to provide it to those who want it. Doctors can opt out.
Now, all these things that we have shown you will lead to the murder of Christians who refuse to follow the mark of the beast. Yes, my dear people, we are told of the beheading of those who refuse the mark of the beast. Let's look at it in Revelation chapter 20 and verse 4. Here is what we are told. I quote, "And I saw thrones, and they sat upon them, and judgment was given unto them. And I saw the souls of them that were beheaded," notice this, beheaded for the witness of Jesus and for the word of God, and which had not worshipped the beast, neither his image, neither had received his mark upon their foreheads or in their hands, and they lived and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. So here we are actually being told of some of those people that were beheaded, and some of them were beheaded for the witness of Jesus, and some of them were beheaded because they didn't worship the beast nor his image. Now, since the worship of the beast and his image is to come in the future, this means that beheading a person must remain, must what we call return as a way of killing people and torturing people. Yes, my dear people. And the facts are, to achieve this beheading, a lot of guillotines, thousands, have come back into existence, have been brought back into existence. They are all over the United States, placed all over the United States and all over the cities of Europe. Right? Thousands have been located in different cities of the United States of America and of Europe. These clips here will show you this fact.
I was riding on a bus from Butte, Montana to North Carolina, when I met a young man all dressed up in full and impressive Army Ranger uniform. He carried his .445 mag gun and many knives and several phones and military backpack and other equipment. He told me he was a staff sergeant from Fort Lewis. Fort Lewis is where many modern guillotines have been stored for a long time, for use in martial law. I teased him at first and told him I knew all about the modern guillotines in Fort Lewis. He was shocked. He said, "How did you know? This is highly classified information." I told him that the U.S. military was not telling the young man like him, but these guillotines will be used on Americans and Christians in the future under martial law, to behead all New World Order resistors. The longer he listened, the angrier he got. Using a few choice expletives, he said, "They never told us this would be used on Americans under martial law, to get rid of all Christians and New World Order resistors. We thought they would be used in Iraq or something." He then asked me to tell him more and more. Finally, so angry at how they were being deceived and brainwashed, he told me, "I will never go along with this New World Order agenda. I am a Christian. I will contact my men in my platoon, 64, and those I can trust who are Christians. I was supposed to go to Fort Hood for more special ops training next week, and then return to train my men in how to operate these guillotines. There is a special underground training center where the guillotines are. We are not allowed to bring in any cameras, cell phones, etc., because of high security and silence regarding these guillotines. They are 6.5 feet high, with hand restraints and a place for a person's head as they stand. We were going to use dummies for practice, but now I am refusing this assignment, and I will contact the men under me who I can trust, who will not go along with this NWO agenda and will come out instead with Humvees, weapons and everything we can get our hands on to fight this New World Order agenda." We parted him the next day. He told me he talked to his sister and family, and they were shocked. They were all military. They told him, "How do you know about this New World Order martial law agenda? It is all highly classified." When he told them about me, I had given him a copy of my Airman magazine with my famous USAF father's cartoon in it. He was quite amazed and impressed. He told me his USAF aunt would submit my name to USAF intelligence computers to see where I stood in the sight of the USAF. He told me, "She said you are red-flagged, subject to arrest and interrogation, and are classified by the USAF as a threat to national security." Me? A threat to national security? All for telling America the truth about coming martial law. This Army Ranger had told me that if he had been on the side of the New World Order agenda, he was authorized, as an Army Ranger with highest security clearance and much special ops training, to march me outside the bus and shoot to kill for knowing this classified information, or he could have called the nearest military base and had vehicles come to arrest me immediately and take me away for interrogation and termination. That is how classified my inside investigating and information reel is. Yesterday when I called him, he had even more shocking information for me. I am on the run, now. They are trying to pick me up and my USAF sister, too. Our pay and military service and bank accounts have all been closed off. We cannot access anything now. They are now arresting half the men in my platoon. Men I talked to, who agreed that they would never go along with the New World Order martial law agenda. All their pay and service and bank accounts have been cut off from them now too. Military helicopters and Humvees are surrounding their homes. They are being watched and picked up one by one. One man in my platoon defended himself when they broke into his home, shooting 5 military soldiers trying to take him. In the process, some were killed before they were able to arrest him.
conclusion, my dear people, we need to make some wise statements before you. Our first wise statement comes from Proverbs chapter 14 and verse 34. We are told, righteousness exalteth a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. Yes, my dear people, the nation of the United States of America is now a reproach all over the world because sin has been spiraling in that country and other nations of the world. But it has been worse for the United States of America because at least they had a constitution that people can trust in, that people can depend upon for protection of rights and freedoms. Now all of this is going. Our second wise statement is this, I quote, to claim that one must give up freedom for liberty is absolutely false. It cannot be achieved because freedom is liberty. Yet, my dear people, this is a false thought that has been going around in the United States of America and England, that you must give up some of your freedom for liberty. But you can't do that because freedom is in fact liberty. What they are asking for you to do is to give up your freedoms, which is your liberties, for something that they call liberty, but which is tyrannism. Yes, my dear people. Point number 3, our third wise statement. There are no collective rights. Man possesses rights and freedoms as individuals, not as the collective. There are only individual rights and freedoms. So the idea of collective rights that is spreading all over the world is a communistic idea. And this collective rights will make the state be able to, what you call, say they are giving you rights as a collective, while they attack your individual rights. There is no collective rights, only individual rights. Our next fourth wise statement is, I quote again, monolithic organizations like government pose a greater threat to individual liberties than the individual breach of a citizen. So if a citizen breach your right and your freedom, breach your rights and your freedom individually, he can be dealt with by the law and just only one individual. But what if you have a monolithic organization, which is government, breaching your rights and your freedoms? They can pass laws to do that. So they pose a greater threat to your rights and freedoms than individual breaches by the individual. Yes, my dear people. Furthermore, our fifth wise statement. Authority that is legal, notice this, authority that is legal can easily destroy rights and freedoms more than individuals that possess no legal authority. So in other words, an individual may possess no legal authority and he can interfere with your rights and freedoms, but those who have authority that is legal can more easily destroy your rights and freedoms through their legal authority than individuals. Yes, my dear people. Our sixth wisest statement. Genuine constitutions do not give rights to government, but rather advocate protection of the rights of the people from government. Yes, my dear people. You see, government is made up of individuals that have rights and freedoms. And the facts are, genuine constitution don't give rights to government as a collective body. It gives rights to individuals, which also make up the government. So genuine constitutions do not give rights to governments, but rather they advocate the protection of the rights of the people from the government. Yes, my dear people. Our next wise statement, point number 6. Constitutions view governments as the greater enemy than the criminal. Yes, my dear people. So once a constitution is constructed, a genuine constitution, let me read it again. Constitutions view governments as the greater enemy than the criminal. We face more danger from legal authority than illegal criminal act. Yes, my dear people. So an illegal criminal act may do something wrong before you, but we face more problems from government. We face more criminal acts from government than the individual. Therefore, constitutions always view governments as the greater enemy than the criminal. We face more danger from legal authority than illegal criminal acts. And point number 7, Now, point number 8. Point number 8. Our final point. The defining of legal, constitutional, governmental function. Let me repeat again. The defining of legal, constitutional, governmental function and the restrictions placed upon government is never rights given to government. So in other words, the defining of legal, constitutional, governmental function and the restrictions placed upon government is never rights given to the government, but mere policy freedoms given to the government that are subject to the insurance of the protection of the great rights and freedoms of the individual. So in other words, all these restrictions and all these functions that are given to government are not rights given to them, and they are subject to the insurance of the protection of the great rights and freedoms of the individual. Yes, my dear people, these that we have said show you that the changes that are taking place in the US government, in the US Constitution, in US law, which always influence the whole world, are going to influence all of us. And it is going to be dangerous for Christians in the future. Finally, my dear people, all that has been said here has been to bless you and to warn you of the lateness of time. You need to prepare for the coming of Jesus Christ. It is happening very soon. The events are fulfilling, and the way is being prepared for the final events that will bring about the second coming of Christ. Now, if any of you want any information from us, Tuesday Seventh-day Adventists, you can just call us at this number, 625-0446, 625-0446, and we will give you further information free of charge. And what you are seeing here are our web addresses. All you can do is to contact us at these web addresses, where you will get more information free of charge. Yes, my dear people, and may God bless you until we meet again. In Jesus' holy name, amen.